Hey there, SCP fans. My name is Grigori Karpin, and this is Simply Creative People, the show about SCP creatives, be they authors, artists, or offsite content creators like YouTube and TikTok. We're focused on bridging the gap between various fans and serving as an introduction to different concepts and stories on the wiki. So, many welcomes to all, and let's get started. Alright. So, today, I'm very excited because we're going to be talking about something that's obviously very close to both my heart and Harry's heart and our guest's heart. And
all both of us.
Yeah, that's all right. And, it's going to be going into my uncomfortable zone of talking about stuff that I've actually been involved with myself, but we're going to do it! So I'm Grigori Karpin, and joined, as always, by...
I'm not Harry Blank.
And our lovely guest,
Placeholder McD. That's me. I'm here. I wasn't super clear on when I was supposed to come in, but I'm here. I have been here the whole time. I have been watching from the sidelines, ready to interfere with all of the goings-on that are ongoings.
Well, that's what Harry already does, so together you guys will...
I'm going to interfere with this interference!
Team interference!
It's going to be meta interference. Anyway, I should use the meta, I should use the prefix meta as few times as possible. Somebody put a counter, and then remove the counter, because the counter starts now.
I'll count.
So, that's actually a pretty good segue. So, Placeholder, why don't you kind of introduce yourself in terms of the SCP universe? You're a writer.
Hello. Yes, I am a writer for the SCP Wiki, and I say that in the least nerdy way possible. But I don't think it matters. We're all SCP fans here. You're listening to a podcast about a reading and writing website, so it's not like I need to appeal to you. Anyway, yes. I'm Placeholder, and I live to make brains explode. If I have written anything that has not made your brain explode when you read it, please put your complaints in the complaint bin so I can ignore them. I do format screws. I do high concept things. Generally, I like to write stories that reward the reader for engaging with them despite being prima facie weird. That is kind of my whole vibe.
And meta. Do a lot of interesting meta stuff. We're not going to get into massive pataphysics here, but you have certainly dipped your toes in that.
I want to say this in the least egotistical way possible. I would say I have reinvigorated the field of pataphysics and high concept in general, which has been looked down upon for a while for one reason or another. I kind of take a different approach to it that I think, for some reason, is really connecting with people, and I'm very, very grateful and fortunate that it is doing so.
Yeah, Placeholder here is actually the most successful of the three of us in terms of the votes on his articles.
Success.
Average-wise.
I'm not trying to be modest. I just don't want there to be that air in the room.
I want to talk, just really briefly, I think there's this general, mentality amongst authors and also fans that, the votes don't matter. And I just want to, slightly push back on that, not because I'm super obsessed with getting high votes, and not that any of the three of us are, but,
I am.
But I want to point out that in a lot of ways, most of the readers of things on the wiki, listeners of this podcast, etc., engagement is hard to gauge, and votes do indicate to us, whether or not something we're writing has resonated with people.
It's true.
I really appreciate the balanced perspective, and I want to put forth the disclaimer that anytime I say any definitive statement, it is important to consider any and all counter arguments to what I've said, because I don't know what I'm talking about. Votes are very important, especially to the people receiving them, and sometimes they're a little too important to the people distributing them. But yes, don't not vote on things, and don't not ever care about votes in all circumstances ever. Nothing I say is ever in all circumstances definitive, but I'm trying to communicate the vibe of I think we're all pretty level peers in the small corner that is the SCP writing community.
It's a lovely sentiment.
Yes. And all three of us, along with 4 other people, did this little thing called SCP-6500, which will tie in pretty significantly to today's topic.
Yeah, it had better, because it's going to be hard to fill the episode otherwise.
Yeah, it wouldn't make much sense.
We inevitably will end up talking about it.
Oh, don't start.
Oh, you can't get upset. You have no moral high ground to get upset at puns.
Well, it's my niche. You can't just steal it.
Listen, we've begun, and there is no return.
Your your shtick is the meta. My shtick is the whatever the Latin is for underneath.
And my shtick is just the absurd. Okay, so before we get into it,
bunch of shticks in the mud.
Placeholder, how did you discover SCP?
Early in the pandemic, while very depressed. No, that's not how I discovered it.
Same.
That's how I started writing for it. How did I discover the SCP Wiki?
Same.
I'm sure it was I don't necessarily remember my introduction, but I'm sure it had to do with a Let's Play of Containment Breach, as is the case for many people. It's not that I watched or even enjoyed those Let's Plays. I'm just sure that was the first time I had ever heard of the SCP Wiki. First time I ever really got into it and actually read stuff. I must have been in grade 12, and you're just bored one night, you're going to bed in the next hour or two, some weird you end up clicking a link from wherever, from Reddit or from the YouTube description or whatever, and then that ends up being a weird little story, and you're this is interesting, and then there's cross links to other things, and I am the type of person where I'm oh, I'll go click on this thing and understand all of the context before I come back to read this. And then that article has other cross-links in it, and then that article has other cross-links in it. So I end up going from Series 1 to Series 5 to SCP-1000 to a tale to another thing, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, trying to just piece together this fucking huge connected universe. And that really drew me in for one entire evening, and I stayed up all night reading articles and exploring the wiki for the first time. And then, the next day came, I had to do stuff for school. My ADHD tendencies pulled me away from it, and then during the pandemic, early in the pandemic, I was bored and smoking a lot of pot, and I rediscovered the SCP Wiki. And I was whoa, I actually started to consider the fact that these are things written by actual people, and I started actually getting into it. I read Antimemetics Division. I was dude, I could do this, which maybe was a little bit of a jump to make, because I had never really engaged with creative writing before. But very fortunately, I realized early on that the greenlight process was not something that was going to be successful for me. Found the SCPD Discord, engaged with the writing help channel there, learned how to write an article. Well, I say that as if there's a way to learn how to write an article, but I got some decent criticism on Integer. Figured it should have an interview log so that it was a little more human and a little less just straight fucking mindfuck. And that did a lot more successfully than I expected it to, and then things developed from there.
Yeah, a common thread that I'm seeing here amongst people that we're talking to on the show and other places is how this like creative outlet was like, I don't want to be over dramatic and say that it like served as a saving our whatever collective asses, but I discovered it long before I started writing for it, and then during law school was like the only thing I could like. I have always read a significant amount, and so it was the only thing that I had time to read because I could mostly read things in like just a short burst, and at least it gave me some interesting world to like get sucked up into. And it was before I had really discovered any of the YouTube channels that did things about it, so I had the same experience as you did, kind of trying to piece together this wider universe. But it's been in writing for it that I've really kind of grown to love.
Yeah,
a lot
for
of the stuff there. Anyway, so we usually do what I've boringly entitled Creative Corner, which is where we discuss our processes. But kind of this whole episode is going to be that. Because today we're talking about something that the three of us... I say the three of us created because there are other authors involved with SCP-6500, obviously. Dark Stuff, IP,
Locke,
Aethris. But... they didn't really engage as much with Vanguard, because that's what we're talking about today, Vanguard. And the three of us really are the ones that like broke it down and discussed where we could go from the midpoint, which used to be the ending of SCP-6500.
Yeah, we're the three that actually wrote about it in 6500, and Aethris is the fourth one because she made our fantastic logo.
Amazing logo.
Just amazing. Like everything she did for 6500, and of course everything she's done otherwise is fantastic.
Very, very lucky to
in case, her, in case any of the readers, and I'm sure some of the listeners have not looked at 6500, we kind of went, and this was mostly from Locke's perspective, to like go out there and try to get illustrations for all of our all of our long ass fucking sections, and Aethris really stepped up. She provided just so much art for it. It's ridiculous, which is why
I'm thinking it's like 13 pieces of art. It's off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure it's something like 13 pieces that Aethris did.
I'm so
alone.
glad we didn't keep like my initial like mock-up of the cleric card that I did.
Oh, but I want those to be used for something too, because you did a fantastic job. But
I have my cleric card on my author page. Your cleric card on my author page.
Oh, well, yeah.
The pixel art things are great.
Yeah, I mean, like, I definitely am good at a specific type of pixel art, and Aethris was much better suited for what we needed, so I'm glad it was her. But yeah, I mean, I found other ways.
I mean, I did like what you produced, and then all of a sudden there was that discussion of, because she was doing something for Dark Stuff's path, and then there was the discussion of, oh, well, she does pixel art, and then she came up with this idea of doing these just bonkers illustrations using negative space and different color schemes to represent each of our paths. And then she did it for the second half, and she did that amazing Pariah banner, which is just...
Oh yeah, and like completely nailed my visions for like what the 05 should look like. I was like just blown away with how well she interpreted the sort of suggestions I gave. I think her contributions to the thing were like just as artistic as everyone else's, and she was an equal player on the team. And I because of that experience, like I kind of consider I hold my artists that I collaborate with in really high regard. Like they always get co-author credit. Yeah. They like usually get some form of payment if I'm kind of made the request to them and like things like that. I think a lot of that really goes underappreciated, and this is a long conversation we could get sidetracked on, but yeah.
Yeah, well, we haven't actually told anybody what 6500 is, so if they don't know, they have no idea what we're talking about at all.
Well, that's okay, because that's what we're going to talk about. So
that's how we talk.
Yeah. So we're going to talk today about Vanguard, which is going to become clear as we go that it is sort of a GUI within a canon. But to get there, I thought we would start by talking about 6500. So this is a good segue. So 6500, which was our which was entitled Inevitable, which was our entry into the 6,000 contest. And unfortunately, we didn't win, but we got a excellent spot and
6th place, baby.
And it's done, So if you don't know, gentle listeners, it is it is the size of a novel and a long novel. Not
95,000 words.
Just shy of the Hunger Games, unfortunately.
That's a comparison.
And much better written, in my opinion.
Much better written.
Although I am kind of a fan of Katniss Everdeen.
I haven't reviewed that story in a long time, but yeah, I'd place my bet on it.
But we kind of started off with this, and there's Locke that gathered a bunch of us together to discuss writing about sort of, the theme of the contest was nature, and we started kind of slowly but surely crafting this idea of a metaphor or allegory, whatever, for climate change, and how the corporations and governments and the people in power have maybe responded to climate change, but in most ways it is doing just the bare minimum and a fairly selfish, self-absorbed sort of perspective to it. And how could we address that in the SCP universe? And we came up with the impasse, which I think was Locke's first idea, and then we kind of helped flesh it out. Which,
yep,
the impasse was essentially the end of all things anomalous. There's a unpredictable entropy that is taking apart, either neutralizing in messy ways or in quiet ways, all the things that are anomalous, whether that's something like thaumaturgy or magic, or things like, the statue, SCP-173. And we started discussing how that would make things different for the SCP Foundation, how the Foundation might respond to it. And the first thoughts were, what sort of panic would this induce? Would the Foundation think, oh, well, this is good, now we don't have to worry about containment anymore? Or would they instead respond in such a way as, no, we need to prevent this from happening because they're far too used to their power within the anomalous world? And obviously that is the read that we went with.
Yeah.
and like to be balanced, to share other perspectives, there is like definitely there are positive parts of the Foundation and their goals. They are deeply misguided in a lot of ways, but there are, some idealistically positive things about the Foundation and their goals. And you can definitely craft a compelling argument that, like, it makes sense for the Foundation to maintain the status quo. But on the whole, what we decided is that it doesn't really make sense to do that, and especially for the meta narrative we were trying to communicate, it made a lot more sense to go the other way.
And it really works as an allegory for climate change, because you can look at, say, corporations or governments that have made responses to climate change to try and change things in their small ways, and can see that some of those results are good, like they're objectively good things. But the reasons that they're doing it, the motivations maybe aren't, purely altruistic, even if certain parts of a corporation or a government are concerned in an altruistic way, just like the Foundation, whereas the body itself is, mostly concerned with preserving its own power, and not even necessarily in a world control-y sort of way. If you're a true believer that containment of the anomalies is the only way to save, the human race, then, such a thing as the impasse would, like, significantly impact that. And there's evidence that we talked about in the original SCP about how things are unpredictable and sometimes violently being neutralized. And so look at all the different anomalous aspects of things that have been talked about on the wiki, in the universe, that aren't evil monsters. And if those things go away, maybe people get hurt, maybe innocent people. And so I think there are ways to look at this that says that, like, the Foundation taking a stand and trying to address the impasse is a good thing.
I think the complexity of the issue is part of why it's, like, so important, and why the story takes so long to tell. And so I just didn't want to gloss over that complexity.
Yeah, we definitely were never. Well, it depends on the perspective of each path, but we were never trying to specifically show the Foundation as just being like this cynical organization. But instead, I think we all, in different ways, kind of tried to show the very nuanced perspective. And just to break down...
Sorry.
No, go for it.
Didn't mean to interrupt you there. No, I was just going to say that the cynicism does kind of... It bled into the creative process because the initial concept that Locke presented was magic is dying. 4 people choose their D&D class and go out there and they go on their mission and they go on their fantastical trip to find an artifact that will fix it. And that was the high concept that Locke came up with. And then we worked in this unfortunate twist to the narrative, which is this is happening because we're locking everything up.
Yeah, I don't know if I communicated it well enough.
Yeah, I think we missed that one.
No, I
wanted to make sure that point gets made here.
Yeah, because it was actually kind of a hard sell. For those of you who are familiar with at least the first iteration of Inevitable, there's a note from 051 explaining the general reasoning and ethos behind what the Foundation is doing, and Locke wrote that, and when they wrote that, they wrote it with sincerity, and I did not at all get that. I thought it was ironic on purpose, and so when we got to the later parts, and we'll get into this later, but when writing later parts, I thought it was not only intentional but a really cool narrative beat that 051 wasn't necessarily being forthcoming or genuine in that statement that they made, and it was kind of a hard sell.
I will say that I have always read it in this fairly nuanced way, where yes, I agreed obviously from the beginning that I thought that they were hiding something 051, but also that they were a true believer in the purpose of the Foundation, and that they thought the ends serve the means serve the end, so they are being deceitful but for a greater purpose. And so, just to be clear, when we go through the first half of Inevitable is all about these 4 individuals, 3 of which are from the perspective of the Foundation. Mine is not, but it brings in a member of the Foundation. And these individual people are out there looking for artifacts to try and solve the impasse. And the idea was that if somebody was to read it, they could just read one part and it would be a good enough story that they were able to come to the conclusion at the end where the O5s decide to discuss how to deal with this, that they would have a complete idea of what the impasse was. But the greater idea, and what I think we did in a very subtle, unconscious way, was how all these different tales, or whatever you want to call them, fed into each other with this overall meta-narrative of a Foundation that is lying to the anomalous world and to its own members, because 051 and some of the other O5s know the reason the impasse is even happening in the first place is because of the stringent controls that Foundation has done over the last century or more, and basically at the core of the impasse is the act of containment.
I wish
the locking.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that the thing that became more important later on when we were discussing what Vanguard was that containment wasn't just the idea of locking something up, but also the conceptual idea of containment, the amnesticization, the changing of history, etc., to preserve normalcy, which was an arbitrary line defined by the Foundation in the first place.
Yeah, I sometimes wish Discord had a raise your hand function, so we could not interrupt.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
not interrupt each other.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Yeah. So, one thing that I think maybe, if I could go back and do it again, I would have stressed more. Something that I think was really cool that maybe didn't stress enough is the idea, the actual in-universe reasoning for why the impasse is happening, which yes, broadly is the idea that containment somehow damages the anomalous as a whole, but it actually becomes much more connected to the climate change metaphor when we go into the fact that there's some idea that all elements of the anomalous, all anomalous quanta that exist are somehow part of a connected ecosystem that we can't really see.
Right.
And containing some parts of that ecosystem, like, damages other parts. And, I have, a myriad of explanations, some pataphysical and some not pataphysical, for why that happens. But generally, like, just the idea that by making the unknown known in a way where it's only known to a select few and not actually allowed to be part of the, like, socially constructed reality beyond the veil, causes them to actually, like, die out for some reason when people aren't aware of them and don't believe in them, and when myths and, like, things like that die out, the anomalous things associated with them also die out. And so that leads directly into the Vanguard stuff we will get to talking about, where there's this importance of informing people about what's going on in order to repair it.
Right. Yeah, I actually really like that we were fairly vague about, the origins of the impasse, other than it is connected and sourced to the act of containment. Because it leaves it open for a lot of different storytelling, and I like the idea that we wrote this thing that is so long when you take it all the pieces, and yet there's still a lot of things that are up for interpretation.
We reinterpreted it because Placeholder came up with his fucking stupid, insane, idiot idea of halfway through the contest, after we've just spent a month arguing with each other and written 45,000 words. Why don't, of all things, we write a second half of it over the next month when we've just...
listen, I am nothing if not ambitious.
Vanguard wouldn't exist if you hadn't done that.
Yeah.
And Vanguard wouldn't exist if you hadn't done that, and it turned out to be a fantastic idea. But that second half was us taking the things we intended not to immediately expound upon and expounding on them. We actually expanded our ideas a month later, just because you thought, wouldn't it be really just a cool idea if we took the longest entry in the contest and doubled it? And I was already pretty much immediately sold on that because of just how stupid and crazy it was.
I wasn't. I was a hard sell. I was like we argued for like not argued like angry, but like just debating back and forth, because I was genuine, which is so funny in hindsight. I was genuinely like worried this is gonna kill it. Like,
and it's so much better now.
I know. Yeah, no debate. I'm so invested. I've spent most of the last 6 months thinking about Vanguard. So yeah, clearly I'm convinced in hindsight. And all it took was, and I mean not all it took, but like we sat there and we were let me consider it, and we go back and forth, and then it just like started getting my brain going of like, how would the Foundation deal with?
Yep.
So I think we should kind of break down what the original ending was.
Yeah.
We don't have to go into massive detail, but like if you
we are going to have to spoil this, because the premise behind Vanguard requires you to spoil at least the first half of 6500.
Right.
And again, to just help things out for anyone who, does maybe somehow hasn't read this article. Like, if you're one of the most of everyone who didn't sit there and like reread the contest rules 1,000 times for the 6K contest, I noticed a very special little thing that had never been done before in the rules that said, like, any and all content edits are freely allowed during the posting period and the voting period. And that really surprised me, because usually it's like, you post your article, you can fix grammar and stuff, but basically if you wouldn't do it to someone else's article, you can't do it to your contest entry once it's posted. Yeah. That's the usual policy. And this time around, it was like, you can add as much as you want until they blow the whistle and count the votes. And so I was like, dude, we built all this steam, now we're sitting around for a month, like, why not write a second half? Like, whether or not that bumps us up to first place or down to 10th place, like, we have a chance to blow people's minds, and that's what I live for, so...
Yeah, I think some of the
great fight ensued.
Yeah, I mean, which I was I'm not going to apologize for it, because I was genuinely concerned about our thing, but it was so funny that the way that I was convinced was like not through the argument, which I was like so vehement. I think this is a bad idea, and I'm so scared that people are already like, oh my gosh, it's so long, and all it took was like sitting there and like contemplating. Well, like let's say the Foundation did go away, but wanted to continue participating in the anomalous world. What does that look like? And then all you got to do is get me thinking about writing something, and then it's
the wheels turn.
Yeah,
right.
And then it did, and then from then on, we were just not even debating, but discussing what the hell does this look like.
So I think
I remember how everybody reacted, because my reaction was, I think there's a very good chance Placeholder just quietly asked me first if I thought it was a good idea before he told everybody.
I'm almost certain that happened.
Yeah, just like should I even tell them this? But he told me, and I was like, my path for the first half is a cliffhanger for a tale I'm going to write later. I'll write it as another path. What the hell? So he didn't convince me at all. I just went yes immediately. Ip, I think, immediately was like, oh geez, I don't know. And then he went, oh geez, what would I write? And then he went, I have an idea. And then he was sold. Dark Stuff didn't want to write anymore for the contest. He was happy with what he wrote and justified.
And I was happy to accommodate that.
Yeah, because then Placeholder got to step in and write his own path, which he had to only write the foreshortened conclusion path instead of one of the bloated long ones that we all got to write, so he got to contribute his full path, so that was good. And Aethris was worried that this would screw up the ending, which she really liked, of the first half, and we had to convince her that we wouldn't screw up the ending. And I think Locke just generally rolled with it after hearing everybody else.
So
so let's talk about Pariah.
Yeah, I was going to say we have to do that before we get into chapter 2.
Yeah.
Right. So Pariah, and again, we're summarizing for those of you who have or haven't read it. So these,
Actually, let's just real quick before you explain what Pariah was. So up until now, the conclusion was going to be sort of unrelated to the 4 paths, which were 4 separate stories about individuals looking for these artifacts. We wanted to come back to the Foundation and look at what the O5s would be discussing about how to deal with this crisis. And then that's where Pariah comes in.
Right, so you do the 4 paths, and you read any combination of them. You might only read one, you might choose to read all 4, and they provide you with a password that allows you to go right to the final part, which was the ending, as far as we were concerned, before the posting started.
And I can't believe we've come this far without discussing probably the most important character to the entire work, 050.
Oh, right, that's true, we didn't mention them at all.
It's mentioned very briefly before he gets to the paths, because it is some important information, but the Foundation doesn't really want you to think about it too much. There is, I know this terminology was argued against at some point, so I know it's not the right terminology, but I forget what terminology I should be using. Honorary Overseer. Basically, back when the Foundation started, there was a group of original 5 Overseers. This is what we posit in Inevitable, at least. There was a group of an original 5 Overseers that had some sort of outside consultant or honorary member or something along those lines. There's intentional vagueness applied throughout this description. There are several different possible profiles of what this person was like or who they could have been that are all presented as equally viable, because who knows which historical document is right or whatever. Classic Foundation mixing truth with misinformation, same as the SPP 001 page. Anyway, you basically, there's this individual who was really good with coming up with unique containment solutions for stuff, seemed to work generally with ethical concerns for the anomalous or something in that realm, and just seemed to generally have an accelerated knowledge of how to deal with anomalous scenarios and what the anomalous's general deal is as a whole. And what we see is this person 050, who the rest of the council jokingly called 050, ends up leaving the council due to some sort of disagreements or administrative concerns or whatever, and then in this person's abandoned study, they find a bunch of notes on the artifacts, and that's how they eventually get the idea to later send the people to get the artifacts in Inevitable. We come back after the 4 paths, and we have the 4 artifacts now, and there's some sort of implication or idea that the Foundation is going to use the 4 artifacts to stop or stall the impasse, but it's not exactly clear how. We've seen each of their powers in isolation, but we don't really understand how they would function together. We go into an O5's brain and body. Basically, the path of the pariah, my 5th path that kind of acted as the closer for the first chapter before we decided we were going to do a second chapter, is written in, I believe, the second person. It's talking to you, the reader, and immersing you in the shoes of O513, the mediator. And this is my specific vision for the O5s that I'm kind of, what's the right word? Forcing on the wiki right now, for lack of a better term. In my head, each of the O5s have their own individual roles and assigned departments within the Foundation, and like new O5s replace the old O5s. And O513, the O513 position exists on the council to be a mediator, basically not only to be a tiebreaker in the case that the rest of the council is tied, but generally to try and reduce conflicts within the council. And so you're put into their shoes as O51 holds a meeting to discuss the fate of a detained person who you then learn is this person that they can only really refer to as O50. They don't know their true identity. None of them were the original overseers that knew this individual. O50 attempted to break into the Foundation and use the artifacts to do some sort of damage to the Foundation and generally try to bring down its central command structure or something to that gravitas.
Right, and like to interject a little bit, the original conflict with the O50 and the founding members, the founding council, was that O50, in their knowledge of all things anomalous, predicted the impasse, and their motivation throughout is the concern that the impasse is not being addressed in, that the practices of the Foundation, if they continued, would bring about something like this.
Right. That's what we kind of learn in the first act of the Pariah Path, is we see that like O50 actually kind of knew what was going on all along and had some pretty good intentions and isn't just some like weird vigilante or whatever, as much as the Foundation tries to portray him that way. And then he uses his interrogation from the O5 Council to relay the information to them that their own actions are causing the impasse, and O51 and some other corrupt overseers that he's working with or he's swayed or whatever, and maybe they knew fully or maybe they only knew in part or whatever, like that nuance and complexity is important. People willfully ignoring information, but there's some sort of split in the O5 Council where, some of them already knew or think, the idea of like reacting to the fact that they are actually the cause of the problem, like, isn't a good idea, or how can they trust O50, or any and all of those things. And it ends up being a pretty balanced argument where there's a lot of, it seems like what we're doing is actually wrong, and if we care about what we say we care about, we need to completely institutionally restructure what we're doing. Whereas the other side of the argument is like, it's not actually an institutionalized issue. It's either an issue perpetrated by individuals or an issue that's like, made real by the collective belief of individuals or whatever. And obviously we have our own reservations about which one of those are right or wrong, especially with respect to the meta-narrative of climate change. But I thought it was important in the article to present it in a balanced way, because that's a big component of the ending we were going for, because it ends up coming down to a vote that goes 6-6, and you, in the position of the mediator, get to decide whether the Foundation dissolves and has to restructure itself institutionally to become something different and better, or whether the Foundation chooses to ignore 050 and use the artifacts in the way they were planning to prolong the impasse some undefined amount of time. And Harry wrote some amazing poetry, both at the very beginning of Inevitable, and at that point, and later at the very, very end. But at that point, there's a set of poems that, sort of punctuate the choice that you made as the mediator and imply what the future of the Foundation might be after this point. And that was, like, I gotta say, one of the biggest things that got me thinking about Chapter 2 and what Chapter 2 might be like.
Yeah, and I mean, to go back a little bit, and yeah, those poems are great.
I'll to go back even further before you go back. Locke wrote the initial draft of the poem that starts 6500, and then I rewrote, and then I wrote the poems that came after.
Sorry, so yes, that's really important. Locke, if you're listening to this, I love you and I really appreciate the work you did on Inevitable. Please don't hate me. There were a lot of details and a lot of arguing, and it's really hard to remember it all.
It's okay. I'm the historian. It's my job to recall all of these things. I'm the only one who needs to make the clarifications. And also, I'll read that bit. I'll read the Vanguard bit of the poem later.
This wouldn't exist without Locke's original idea. If Locke had not brought us in individually to discuss, kind of fucking with the idea of like narrative on the wiki, which is what my entire purpose has been since I started writing for the wiki. It would not. Since the beginning, it's why I started doing a series, which was, SCPs and tales that connected together but could stand on their own, because I wanted to push back on the idea that, like, long-form fiction couldn't work on the wiki. And so I was immediately on board, but none of this would exist without Locke. So, just to be clear, we all are very much in awe of that original idea.
Yeah, I think if any member...
And the original SCP file.
Yes.
Yes, Locke wrote the SCP that opens it.
If any member had not been present, it would have been a totally different project. Entirely, completely different.
Yeah, I'm super
because
happy
we would have
with
lacked some of the perspectives that went into the arguments that informed what eventually came to be.
Yeah, and so when I was gonna go back, I wanted to reconnect, the idea that what Aethris was, and I won't speak for her, but like what I remember her saying was that the concern was that the open-endedness of our original ending on the vote was what was so compelling, because it left the reader with the sense of what could happen next, and that if we actually filled in those blanks, that would ruin the mystery, which went into our discussions of how do we actually continue this. We did leave it on a sort of, not cliffhanger, but like there's this dual, option. There's this binary choice. Do we dissolve or do we not? And I don't know if it was Harry or if it was you, Place, but the idea of like, well, this just makes two different timelines. One in which they did preserve the status quo, and one in which they dissolved. And I think that preserved a lot of the character of the ending that Aethris so valued, because in the end, we are still, as much as we went on to tell further stories, we're still preserving that sense of like, well, it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, actually, can I raise my Discord hand on this one? The thing I wanted to do, and this will seem slightly catty because the excellent, I loved it, I critted it, thing that actually won the contest, really good article, does this thing that I intentionally did not want to do, and several other articles in the contest did this thing that I did not want to do, and I think actually SCP-5000 actually technically does this as well, which is it's the contest, it's a huge, enormous, world-changing event that didn't fucking happen. We got a file from an alternate universe that says this might happen, and maybe it'll happen here, which is a good hook. Yeah. It could be cool, but it is also a cop-out from having to use it for your writing going forward. And what I wanted to make absolutely 100% sure was what we write happens. This is a thing that I'm going to write about later. This is a thing that's canon to everything that I'm writing. I want our gigantic world-changing event to be canon. I don't want it to be a canon of one article.
Absolutely.
And that's what's great about this is these two different timelines, they exist, they are real, they are things that we will keep using, and one of them is the timeline my writing just shifted into being in.
I really quickly want to add on to that. I was so committed to that, right? That when I was critting your first path, the warrior, there's that scene where you're in the not you are, but the place is talking to the Rounderpede, the curator of the library or whatever, and it's like, hey, like if the impasse is damaging the Wanderer's library, and there's only one Wanderer's library in the entire multiverse connected to every individual timeline, there can't be two Wanderer's libraries, then like, doesn't that mean this is like a multiversal event? And I think it's really good that we included this detail. The Rounderpede suggests that like this must be occurring in a majority of all timelines across the SCP multiverse. And without getting too thick into the weeds on this, the implication is that in a majority of canons on the site, inevitable takes place, like not just the sort of one that we write and subscribe to. And I haven't seen a lot of exploration of that for one reason or another. It kind of makes sense that there isn't a lot of exploration of that, but the further implication from that is that every timeline in which the impasse occurs also splits into its own Vanguard variant and its own Threshold variant. And like, this maybe is only in my head and no one else's, but that's what happened in my head. And like, I don't think anyone else has talked about that.
Well,
I love that detail.
It's definitely,
that was the greatest piece of crit. I loved it. I was so happy that you pointed that out and made me add that reference in, because I think that was the best addition that I made. Sorry, go ahead, Grigori.
Oh, well, I just was going to say that we're already at our point of conflict, because it 100% is not happening in my head, because otherwise why would it be solved? Why would the impasse be solved if it was addressed in this universe, if it was happening in all universes? So in my head...
Well, I guess that means a supermajority pick Vanguard.
Well, but I mean, I think that's what's fun about it, is that it's totally open for interpretation in that regard. Yeah. But like in my head, it started in this universe that created these dueling timelines, and that's why these dueling timelines are so important for the discussion of the impasse. But the other interpretation is just as valid, which is again something else that I love that we set up, because a lot of this happened so organically. Like the Vanguard itself, which is one of these timelines where the Foundation dissolves, happened entirely by us just discussing, well, what would that even look like? And so, I think it was really interesting that we did this thing that is so full and rich in detail from mostly two perspectives, depending on your timeline. But within those two perspectives, we each wrote two different paths, and could be interpreted in different ways. And I just love that, like, there are lots of people that have, come to me on Discord or on Twitter or whatever, and what about this? And it's like, well, what about that? It's not for us to decide where this is a setting, because from very early on, and I think it was Dark Stuff that first mentioned it, we were discussing the fact that, like, this isn't one article. Let's put that debate to rest. Anybody that thinks that it wasn't, it is. But it is almost, doing all the legwork to set up a canon. And so, at least for myself, and I know Harry, you and I talked about it privately, and I'm sure you guys did as well, was that this is 100%. I'm going to be continuing this. Whether it was continuing specifically the character arc of the people I did in the Path of the Cleric or not, but I just love that, like, it was kind of this organic development of a canon.
Yeah, for all that I constantly joke that we were arguing and complaining at each other the whole time, the amount of agreement and the things that we actually came up with out of the agreement were immensely gratifying. I certainly wouldn't trade those 2 months for any other alternative version of those 2 months where we didn't have the arguments that created this quite fun thing that we made.
Yeah,
it was definitely stressful, but the thing was
so
amazing. Yeah, because Harry,
but
you and I
so
kept
proud
like
of it still.
you and Harry, you and I kept like trading places about the person who would like serve as peacekeeper.
Yes, every once in a while I'd look at the group and I'd be like, I can't with this conversation. And then other times I would look at it and go, I guess I have to right now.
Wait, we agreed on that? I don't remember agreeing on that. Let's go look back through the logs and reply to chats, even though the reply function isn't in Discord yet, and pin comments that should have been pinned weeks ago.
Oh God, yeah. You think that Inevitable is long? You should see how long the chat that produced.
Oh my God, we wrote
off
two
as a
novels.
Group chat. It started off as a group chat, and then we made our own server for just us, and it just and I mean we all
good still have it.
Oh yeah, it's still there. We all fell into that role of like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Or at least I did a couple of times where I was like, what? Wait, who? Because we were on slightly different time zones and also leading different lives or whatever, and so sometimes it would be like a whole conversation happened when I wasn't looking or when I was asleep or something, and it's like, wait a minute, what's happening?
But now it's nice. It's like an historical document because I looked back at it earlier today and I went, who named Vanguard? And the answer was Placeholder went, maybe Vanguard, and then Grigori went, that sounds like a military thing. No, actually, maybe it cannot be a military thing. Yeah, let's do Vanguard. And then Aethris thought it was good, and then I thought it was good, and then it's like, okay, it's a good historical resource to see where shit came from.
Yeah, I remember Place was the one that suggested it, and the reason it sold for me was the double meaning, because there is the military in the traditional sense. It's not I don't think it's really a current military term, but it certainly was back in the day of like medieval fighting and whatnot. The Vanguard were the people in not the front lines, but like sort of fighting at the lead of a specific engagement. But also the Vanguard is this term for those people on the cutting edge, those people that are out there creating a new world. Not to get super philosophical, but.
And protecting.
Yeah. And so we get to I don't know, Place, do you want to talk about Voyager a little bit?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, before that happens, one votes whether or not to dissolve the Foundation and gets split off into one of two alternate timelines, and one of them is the one where they decide fuck it, we won't have a Foundation anymore, and that's where the poem happens. And since you plugged the poem that happens, I'm going to read it because it's 4 lines long. Okay, it's 5 lines long.
Go.
So you vote yay, let's dissolve the Foundation. The Foundation is the problem. We'll recreate it into something better that doesn't contain so much as it educates, whatever. You click yay, dissolve the Foundation, motion passes, and then because the entire thing has been breaking the fourth wall and is basically a tale designed to look like an SCP, you are rewarded with poetry as your original ending for the whole SCP, and the poetry for this case is, we smash the locks, we snap the keys, and fade into the rising breeze. Should seasons change for ill, remember, come what will, we did not fail. And now, that's a link to the new timeline, because we've written another half of this damn SCP, and it brings us to these 2 options, and there are 2 new paths for each timeline, and Grigori and Place did these ones.
Right. So yeah, and we're obviously we're going to be focusing on the half that this episode is all about. But the framing device here is like you are now the reading as some sort of temporal anomalies department agent, and so you're able to kind of review these 2 timelines individually and look at the stories that happen in each one. And we also have had this framing device going throughout that, like, because magic is dying, the Foundation is incorporating more magic and esoteric things into the presentation of their articles to try and maintain magical things that are dying out. And so that's kind of our justification for, like, it's fourth wall breaking and it has tail elements, but it's still an SCP. And we get here and we see that the timelines that you have to review are still being portrayed in path form. And so on the yay, like, let's dissolve the Foundation side, we get 2 paths about Vanguard. I think it actually makes more sense to talk about Emissary first, and then we can get into Voyager.
Well, I don't mean to... I don't want to sound like a dick.
I think what he's going to say is that because Emissary talks entirely about Vanguard and sets it up, and yours is a tangent in the Vanguard universe, it might be easier to talk
you know what?
Yes.
Fair enough. You convinced me. Okay, so...
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, what's the deal with the Voyager path? So, Dr. Ilsa Reinders, a wonderful character that Harry and I kind of jointly came up with, but he wrote her introductory article, and it's one of his best articles. Everyone should go read it if you haven't already. And yes, votes are important. Absolutely. Vote on it. I'm not going to tell you how to vote on it, but vote on it. Yeah. So,
I'll tell you. I don't give a shit.
no more
role.
ADHD tangents. What is Voyager about? So, Ilsa Reinders is the Voyager. She is the director of the Temporal Anomalies Department. At some undisclosed point in the future, she switches from what she did previously to doing that. And she's introducing a new hire to the Department of Temporal Anomalies sort of site that is like a pocket universe that's attached to the main timeline but outside of the main timeline and doesn't experience time linearly. Anyway, while she's there, something weird happens with her jump watch, which is this time travel technology I came up with that's heavily inspired by a game called Thumper that I play a lot. Anyone who knows Thumper will maybe appreciate this reference. Anyway, the idea is you have to tap according to a specific rhythm on the watch, and because tapping is sort of like a time-related thing, it's like a rhythmoglyph, which is a type of kinetoglyph, which is a type of magic system in the SCP universe, and it syncs you up with a different time period, and then you actually travel to that time period. Some sort of malfunction happens with the jump watch, and she gets shunted through a bunch of different points in time, and all these different points in time that are being portrayed throughout this story are portrayed in chronological order, even though she doesn't experience them in chronological order, because that's a conceit of the way that Department of Temporal Anomalies documents work. And so it's left as a sort of puzzle to the reader to figure out which order the scenes are supposed to go in. But
I love it.
Yeah, she gets shunted through a bunch of different places. She meets other versions of herself while on this journey and has to like try and come up with creative ways to get back to where she came from, because she had a rather severe malfunction with her jump watch. Not only did she go to a different time period, but she went to a different timeline. Because the split between the Threshold and Vanguard timelines happened so recently, time travel devices can get kind of confused between the two branches, and so she ends up, even though this version of Ilsa is from the Threshold timeline, she ends up getting shunted into the Vanguard timeline, where and not only is she in the Vanguard timeline, but she's in the Vanguard timeline 100 years into the future after the dissolution of the Foundation, more or less 100 years, and she gets to explore a Vanguard-ified version of Site-43 and some Vanguard-ified versions of some of Site-43's SCP documents as she looks for, some sort of way to travel back to her home timeline or travel back to a version of herself that can tell her how she would find technology that would allow her to travel to her home timeline. It's a little bit of a mess, but that's kind of the point. Anyway, we get a glimpse of what the future of the Vanguard timeline is, purportedly going to look like, which is, I'm glad I chose to write about Site-43 and Nexus 94, because there's this really interesting thing Harry's done with Nexus 94, where it's like the land that they're on actually used to belong to indigenous peoples, and some of the anomalous creatures there come from indigenous mythology. And there is one article Harry has that's particularly incessant about the fact that they shouldn't be there, and they shouldn't be messing with things that aren't their mythologies and aren't their anomalous creatures to worry about, and are already contained by practices that already exist, because certain people are informed about the anomalous and know how to handle it already, which feeds directly into what we're saying with Vanguard. People should be informed about the anomalous instead of kept from it, so that they can live in the real world instead of being, fed a coddled, doctored version of the world, in which they don't have to confront the problems that the Foundation has decided it needs to single-handedly, Atlas-style, can't carry on its shoulders. We generally see that, no one is actually running the site. Everything works autonomously. There are, things that are maintaining, the greenery and, providing general, sustenance to the environment. But by and large, the Foundation understands that not the Foundation, I should say, Vanguard understands that it's not really their place to be, and aside from just keeping an eye on it and reinvigorating the environment, as, is kind of their duty since they've fucked it up so much there, they're hands off with it, as they should be. And I really enjoyed portraying that. And there are a couple of other nuances that I don't need to necessarily get into, but that's the general spirit of the Voyager path. And it sort of shows the idealized version of Vanguard that, we're hoping happens. And then I think a good transition into Emissary is looking at the actual complexity of how we get from point A to point B.
Yeah, so as some background, prior to coming to 6500, or what would become 6500, I had been kind of ruminating on a series or a lengthy tale or something from the perspective of the Chaos Insurgency, because I had so many problems, ethically, and also just problems with the baseline narrative of tropes within this SCP wiki, which I have spent a lot of time writing different ways about. Victim in a lot of ways is all about addressing things I have problems with the SCP wiki as well, or at least some of them are. And those ruminations, and our place, especially you and I, talked for hours about what the Vanguard would look like and where they would come up with it, and all the different discussions, and that really informed what ended up being Emissary, because we wanted to talk about the fact that they're dissolving, they're not abandoning the anomalous world. They're dissolving the Foundation, but that doesn't mean that those resources in this organization, at least the people that choose to stick around with it, would suddenly just wash their hands of it and go retire. And so I kind of thought that the best way and the most opposite direction of a story from the Cleric path would be Emissary, and which was basically a series of debates between different characters about how this new organization should behave and why they should even do it. Only it wasn't going to be from the O5s, because I decided really early on that if the O5s voted to dissolve, then the O5s were poisoned, even the ones that were not corrupt, and that they needed to go, and they would not be part of this new function as well. And so Emissary gathers together a sort of ragtag crew of Foundation characters, old and new. For the first time I wrote Clef. Dr. Light is there, Tilda Moose, Ip's character of I'm forgetting his name right now. Not McTavish, something like that. Anyway, and
my site director.
Your site director, and also Dr. Dan from Resurrection. But then
Zwist is there too, I think.
Zwist is there too as well, yes. And also some people, and then and the point of it being was that from the very beginning, if Vanguard was going to be something different, the way they needed to start right out of the gate was to include the anomalous world instead of imposing their will on it. Because the ultimate debate that we were having is, if Foundation is causing this through containment, then what the fuck is normalcy? You know, you already implied it, Place, when you talked about the fact that there's an ecosystem that they couldn't see or wouldn't acknowledge was real that dealt specifically with the anomalous. So what that means is that this idea of normalcy was imposed artificially so and arbitrarily so by the definitions of a few men and women and one robot. And, you know, it was very quickly, at least for me, needed to be said that there needed to be the presence of GOIs within, and they would no longer be GOIs, but people that were brought into this new organization. And because I didn't want to go too far afield, I sort of just picked representatives from Sarcasm, representatives from Church of the Broken God, and some individual characters from different perspectives as well, and the Serpent's Hand, which included... from the very beginning, I thought, okay, the Church of the Broken God, the Cogwork Orthodoxy, and the main Broken Church are a little too stuck in their perspectives. But I think what has been written about the Maxwellists seems to be a lot more, at least the things that I had read, especially the stuff that you had written, Place, for the Canon Renaissance contest for AAID. It's kind of implied that there was a more open-minded... You know, first of all, the Maxwellists are concerned only with sentience, right? So they're not really as worried about whether or not somebody is a human being or just an artificial, but it doesn't matter. And that already implied to me that they were a little more open-minded. So I thought, okay, we're going to bring these people in.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's important to interject here and say that I didn't that wasn't my idea. I definitely wrote some important stuff that contributes to the current state of Maxwellism, but it was already I already sort of from reading up on the hub, and Sonny Clockwork has done some amazing stuff, and many other people. IHP IP has done some amazing stuff. I already read up and kind of saw the Orthodox ones are Orthodox and the Maxwellists are tech accelerationist progressives. I totally get it.
Yeah. And so, I thought that if anybody that was connected to the Church of the Broken God was going to get involved with this, it would make the most sense for them. Because also, well, they don't really seem to have such a problem, or at least I wrote them as being not really having such a problem with the Sarkics. And, because I'm bored of that dichotomy. I understand the traditional, and I've written about the tradition of enmity between these two groups of people. But the Sarkics are a diaspora of people. They are a bunch of individual related cultures and a couple of weird cults that are connected through tracing lineage ideologically back to this guy who's been gone for a long time. And so... the idea of saying that they are all evil just feels a little too close to my people, the Jews, and how certain religious organizations have treated them. And so I wanted to kind of bridge that gap a little bit, especially if we were going to be writing, if not a more optimistic, at least a little more. I'm not even really sure how to describe it, because I wouldn't say, I've always been very clear when people ask me that Vanguard is not a utopian story, because it's not about this perfect, wonderful world that's going to happen. As you mentioned, the nitty-gritty of the discussions of the people that are involved with the creation of Vanguard are, nuanced and down in the dirt, because this is going to involve a lot of diplomacy and discussion and hostile actions from other people.
And early in our portrayal of Vanguard, there was a lot of comparison to Avalon, which is another fantastic contest entry. And
yes.
I understand why that comparison happened. And
right.
I think the really important thing to note is that T. Rutherford takes us on a sort of magical, fantastical journey through what a utopian friendly version of of the Foundation verse would look like if all the GOIs got along. And I think that's a great framing device. I don't have, like, you know, I think he told a wonderful story, but, like, the main difference between that and what we did is, like, we're getting into the political nitty-gritty of, like, how changes like that happen and confronting the reality of the fact that any utopia is a dystopia, and so how can we, like, try to avoid all dystopias and do something, you know, realistic within the premises of the SCP-verse.
Actually, yeah, and quickly, while we're on that topic of what it also isn't, even though it superficially looks like, it's also not Broken Masquerade, where the Foundation still exists, deals with lawsuits, tells people about the dangerous things, and is more overt, because, again, we are moving into a space where we're actually having to decontain and integrate the anomalies into the world, which is not what happens in Broken Masquerade. So no, it's neither Avalon nor Broken Masquerade. There are multiple different ways for the Foundation to either not be around or change, because it's such a complex thing. There's lots of cool ways to reimagine it, and this is just another one.
Yeah, so, you know, when we were discussing, you know, the SCP Foundation is named after their motto, Secure, Contain, Protect. What would the Vanguard's motto be? And we eventually came down to Shelter, Normalize, Inform, because we still wanted to keep the fact that... What?
Snee.
Oh.
Yeah.
It could have been Sin, so it's better that it's Snee.
Well, that's why it isn't Sin. But, you know, the idea of we wanted the Foundation to still act as a protective force as they transition to Vanguard, in the sense that, like, they're not just going to open the floodgates of everything anomalous that they've kept. There's a lot of horrific things on the wiki. And if those things were locked in boxes, the Foundation's not going to just be like, well, welcome to Utah, SCP-682. Or whatever, you know, like, just have fun. No, this was about, that's why I brought up the point earlier about the conception of, the conceptual idea of containment, because the Vanguard was still going to be concerning itself with the protection of the world from dangerous anomalies, but it was the normalize and inform. So the biggest difference, I think, for me between Avalon and Vanguard is that Avalon is all about integrating the anomalous into everyday life. And Vanguard is coming from the perspective that everyday life has always been anomalous. It's just been hidden away. And all the Vanguard personnel are trying to do, through a variety of ways, is to make the outside world, the public, not only aware of it, but you know, acclimated to the idea of the reality that has been hidden from reality for a long time.
Yeah, it's like the big sort of problem is, like, the version of the world that supposedly existed before the Foundation or any sort of normalization or containment force, rather, like that existed, is the, you know, the world of myth and legend and fantasy that we're familiar with, that we, you know, have some sort of collective idea of, that there were dragons at some point, and there was magic, and there was, you know, the kind of stuff you see in, like, Bellerverse, and like, the idea is the existence of the Foundation or similar organizations have allowed humans to become dominant enough that they can create all of these technologies and create all of this progress. And it's like, now humans have made all of this progress, and we're gonna try and reintroduce everything without necessarily just going back to, like, everything being mythical and humans, like, losing all of the progress that they've made. And so it's like, how do we put those two things together without everything collapsing?
Yeah, so to get a little bit back to, and connecting to that point you just made, the idea of the nitty-gritty and the political was the discussion that happens in Emissary between these different characters is, how do we even go about doing this? And the idea that they come upon is that we can't, as I just said, open the floodgates, but instead have to, like, stagger things out. We have to, like, slowly kind of bring the modern world into realization. And we're not forcing anyone to take the anomalous into their lives. All we're doing is informing them that this stuff exists, and then deciding how to best go about that. And you know, from the very beginning, as much as I thought that this would still be a great place to tell horror stories or to tell action stories or whatever, this was very much going to be concerned with the idea of public relations and diplomacy. because, the Foundation has done the Foundation has done a lot of bad things that is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way. Whether that's, ex-Serpent Hand members, whether that is, individuals within the GOC, or people that the Foundation has oppressed, like the Sarkics, in my opinion. And so they have a lot of things to overcome, not just in the fact that they've been in containment, but a lot of their, shady, the ends justify the means behavior. But then there's also the idea of, how do we even convince people that this stuff is real in a realistic fashion? Because education was always going to be the main point. And so in Emissary, I tell this narrative through what is effectively an interview log, not an interview log, but a series of dialogues between these individual characters. And then I interspaced within it a sort of a hint, a sneak peek at what a Vanguard file might look like, only in a very abbreviated form, using fairly famous SCPs. And so each one of them in a different way was focused on, okay, well, how are we going to get people aware of this and informed? Because as you mentioned earlier, the greatest thing that we can do to make sure the impasse doesn't happen again is to sort of slowly but surely eradicate this arbitrary notion of normalcy by educating the people around us. And how that behavior, that ideology that Vanguard is now representing will actually rub a lot of people the wrong way. And there's a lot of discussion in Emissary about how some of the more conservative members of, and I don't mean politically conservative, I mean specifically against change, members of the Church of the Broken God, or even some of the Sarkic cults, or the GOC, etc., will be pushing back against this pretty harshly. And the Foundation will no longer be allowed to just wipe history out, because we're no longer changing people's memories. We're no longer doing D-class, because all these things no longer matter, or are no longer justifiable, if they ever were, because there's no veil to protect, because we're telling everyone about it. And that's why it's not like the Broken Masquerade, because the Broken Masquerade is everybody knows, but Foundation is still interested in locking everything up. And this is everybody is going to slowly but surely know in a controlled fashion and deal with, as you mentioned, Place, the discussions that are happening in the wider world, whether that's in the public arena or taking the perspective of individual people within Vanguard. But yeah, I mean, Emissary was always the most focused on world building, which I try to avoid doing things that are just world building, and so I was trying to do it from a fairly organic human conversation. But we also needed to set this up in a way that made sense. And so for any of the things I've written for Vanguard since, I've included a link to that offset and said, maybe read this.
And I hope I think everybody did a wonderful job with the project, but I think in particular, only you and your lawyer brain could have depicted that that discussion as well and as thoroughly as you did, and have really got inside the heads of each of the individuals there. I just thought that was really well done, and I'm glad you were the one to do it.
Well, thank you. Honestly, thank you in a lot of ways, because it was all of our discussions. I mean, I didn't just copy and paste our discussions, but you and I especially were talking about what would the realities of this really look like, and just debating the little bits, the little details here and there, which led to the conversation that organically was supposed to communicate to the reader how they would come to this. Because we didn't just want to say, okay, now they're dissolved and here's what Vanguard is. We wanted to take someone on a journey of here are these established characters from perspectives we already understand. I only brought in Clef because I thought it would be funny to utilize him as the perfect personification of the old-fashioned SCP Foundation.
Yeah, a stand-in for the corrupt 05s that couldn't make it.
Right, exactly, and which is hilarious, because then I decided to keep writing about him.
Of course, he would persist in any fucking ecosystem that,
Yeah, of course, yeah. Let's take a break, and then come back and talk about kind of Vanguard in a more bird's eye view. All right, so we're back from our break, and we're going to talk about why this matters to us, essentially. Not just in the sense of it was a fun story, but why we continuing, especially myself, are continuing to write about it. And so I wanted to talk about kind of a bird's eye view of why this is even attractive to us. The idea of a Vanguard that is concerned with, adapting the anomalous and informing the public, and all the different political and not political confrontations that they might experience. So, do either of you guys want to?
Yeah,
I'll throw one.
Yeah, you can start.
No,
Okay.
You can start.
Okay, I can start. So,
you can start. I trust you.
Okay, I don't know if that trust
be able
is,
to talk
is
at any
well
time.
placed, but here I go. So I generally in most of my writing, I come from the sort of QNTM school of thought where I'm like, I want to portray the aspects of the Foundation's ideals or ideology or concept that are inherently cool and or like good morally. That's what a lot of my work does. It is nice to occasionally take a departure from that. And I wouldn't necessarily consider like my Deep Well and Admonition stuff really a departure from that, because I'm really focusing on the shit I think is cool, which is like the science and the machines and whatever. But it's nice to take a real, like, genuine departure from that, and instead of being like, yes, all of this is cool and all of this idealism and abstractionism and absurdism is interesting, like, sometimes it's an important exercise to sit down and be like, okay, if I were like a person actually trying to be the best, the morally best version of myself in the Foundation universe, what would I do? And then extending that to what would the Foundation do if it actually was trying to be the morally best version of itself and had to confront like all of the reasons why it isn't necessarily currently the best morally best version of itself. I think that's not only a fun exercise, but an important exercise, because it can be easy to get so sucked into how cool certain parts of the idea of the SCP Foundation are that we sometimes forget that if such an organization existed in the real world and people learned about it, there would be outrage because there is something wrong with like taking away information and like sort of like rights and responsibilities from people without their consent. And that's what the Foundation is doing by and large. Like, there's lots of other things that they're doing that are not good, but like the biggest thing that's happening here is they've decided like they know how to solve all the problems and they're going to solve all the problems on their own. That's a very sort of paternalistic impulse. That's a very sort of like, I understand what the problem is and I know how to fix it. So like Atlas, I will hold the world on my shoulders and I will fix the whole thing. Instead of sitting down with the individuals whose scenarios you're trying to fix and saying, here is my side of the story. I need to hear your side of the story. We need to come to an understanding about what's really going on here. And then we need to, as a team, fix it. Because that is the only way that humans actually achieve things and accomplish big tasks that are bigger than one individual. Like, no individual snowflake can be responsible for the avalanche. And so no individual snowflake can say to itself, I know exactly how to cause the avalanche, I'll go here. All of the, allegorical snowflakes need to communicate in order to cause the avalanche to happen. The avalanche being social change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually that segues reasonably well into what I was going to say was the thing that mattered to me, because the main thing that happens with the creation of Vanguard in the meta narrative of the climate change allegory is it's not about one person fixing the problem individually. It's about the fact that there is an institutional problem and a lifestyle change is required from basically everybody, and you can't just pretend that the problems will be solved if we tell the individual consumer to drive his car less, or in this case, if we tell one site to let go one anomaly, or if we go out and we find a magical sword that causes pataphysics to work again. Like, yeah, that's nice. That's a good bandage. That's a good stopgap. But looking for the stopgaps is not going to solve the actual problem, when the actual problem is us and the way we do everything right now. And the way we do everything right now is causing these problems. And Vanguard's solution is we do everything differently from how we've been doing it. And that's why it is, of course, the correct option in the vote, and there is a wrong option, and the wrong option leads to the tales that Ip and I wrote that continue to be the basis for going forward in S&C Plastics and on Guard 4.3, because we want to exist in the wrong timeline, because that's the one where the Foundation is still the same, and we can finish the stories that we've already started to write. But the ending that I wrote with Placeholder at the end of 6500, which is called Crossroads, looks at the two timelines and goes, one of these choices was altruistic. It was, all right, fuck it, we're doing everything wrong institutionally, change the institution. And the other one was fairly selfish. It was, if we keep fucking around the way we've been fucking around, we might be able to find a miracle cure that will fix it, so we'll do that. And they end up making the rather grandiose statement at the end that at least they made the decision to keep looking for those stopgaps, and on the other side, Vanguard made the decision to make a big change, not changing anything, not even trying to do anything differently. Stagnating is just the worst possible choice. So Vanguard is the best choice. The threshold timeline is the considerably lesser second best, and completely failing to do anything is the worst possible thing, because that's just the end of the world, and that's symbolized by the fact that that timeline doesn't get to be part of the canon because it just stops existing. It's right. It has no ontological stability beyond 6500. You vote not to do anything, well, you don't exist anymore.
Yeah,
but the Vanguard one is the big statement of, like, we need to do something big.
Yeah, if you don't click the button, nothing happens.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that goes, and you've just implied as much, that goes to our, core narrative function of being an allegory for climate change, because what's going to happen if those systemic and institutional problems are not addressed, and not just by individuals, but by the systems themselves? Well, the fucking world's going to end. Or at the very least get very bad.
Right.
Yeah, I in tying it together to what you both have talked about, we can leave politics out of it, but like, I have always been somebody who's very significantly concerned with injustice and systemic injustice, and I'm a lawyer, which in the United States, which is a place in which the rule of law is morally corrupt in a lot of ways. And I'm not the only lawyer that would ever say that. There is significant problems with our Constitution and significant problems with the way that federal and state laws protect bad actors, specifically systemic bad actors, especially in the corporate world. And I have a fairly cynical view of the Foundation, and I always have, and I find it a very compelling setting to tell stories, but it's always been a background narrative that this is a story about systemic corruption. And I in Hakantri's, it's back in the 90s in a more nostalgic perspective, because I was a child in the 90s, and so the Foundation that I portray there is mostly concerned with the greater good, but in a very specifically cold, not cruel way that is so traditional for the Foundation on the wiki, that I try to avoid the more morally black ends justify the means storylines, but that's always there in the background. And then in my more modern stories, which is Victim, I'm unabashedly calling out the Foundation and all systemic institutions that are imposing their will on individual people, and most of the time in a funny way, mostly just giving a big middle finger. Somebody recently asked me to try to narrow down the political spectrum of victim, and I said their political spectrum is hierarchical power structures can go fuck themselves.
Yes.
Like, it's not progressive, it's not communist, it's not conservative, it is every one of you motherfuckers needs to fucking take a look in the mirror. And my attraction to Vanguard is this is a setting in which, in my opinion, one of the worst actors in the SCP-verse, which is the Foundation itself, can actually address those wrongdoings. Because at its core, even if you portray the Foundation in a morally gray way, and you're not concerned with making it, the evil Foundation that is kind of more present in the early stuff, this is an organization that practices slavery in the form of D-class. It practices, massive non-consensual violation of personal liberties in the fact that they are constantly changing the narrative and erasing people's memories and locking people up without, habeas corpus or due process. And I understand in the universe where that exists and why it's quote unquote necessary, but it's always really bothered me, and I absolutely fucking love this opportunity to discuss and perfectly address it, because even in Emissary I brought up the fact that, okay, we're going to go public. When we go public, there's going to be goddamn witch hunts about us because Clef even says, well, there has to be some sort of amnesty, and I don't even allow for a blanket amnesty, instead discussing the fact that some of the worst actors are going to have to be put up on the sacrificial block, because there's no way that we can exist in the open without addressing some of the problems that we've done, specifically the Foundation's practices and how heinous they are in a lot of ways. And I don't mean the more extreme, grim, dark examples of some of the articles that we've seen on the wiki, but even just everyday understandings of the Foundation. If you, and I'm not condemning anyone because I portrayed them as good guys as well, but, in reality, even if they are doing something specifically good in the moment, their institution is, in general, a bad thing. And that's why, it fits so well with my understanding of this arbitrary notion of normalcy, because the Foundation decided what normalcy is, and then they decide to enforce it. And we have evidence throughout the wiki that long into the history, way deep into the past, whether it's the Deva, the Sarkics, whether it's any number of different mythical SCPs or things that are like that, the world existed long before the Foundation was around and didn't end. So why, when the Foundation says, oh, we die in the dark so you can live in the light, well, people were doing, I'm not saying that things weren't a little more chaotic before the Foundation, they probably were, but the world existed and didn't. Right. So all these different end of the world scenarios that the Foundation is apparently keeping at bay, maybe they're not the only option. Maybe there are ways to preserve some sort of existence for humanity in the face of the anomalous that is more honest, a little more transparent, and something where, if you are a doctor, a researcher, an agent for the Foundation, you could actually potentially sleep at night.
Right. Yeah.
Because, people have said, well, writing for the Foundation, that means you're just trying to write something more optimistic, right? And it's like, well, yes, in the sense that I am, I'm at heart a very cynical skeptic about the way the world works, and yet, in my heart of hearts, I look at things like the great works of art or architecture that humanity has brought about through working together, and think that, well, we are capable of really great things. And so, in some ways, I'm kind of a very cynical optimist.
I'm cynical, and I want to be optimistic. I want to believe.
Right, yeah. And this is an exercise in that for me. As much as the individual stories that deal with the Vanguard normalizing and informing the public, are very nuanced and gray, because this is still, I have always wanted and do always try to write fairly grounded things, except for when I go really absurd. And that's why I was constantly interested in like diplomacy and politics and the public relations nightmare that the Vanguard will now be facing, because they can't just be like, yo, magic's real, and then kind of cross their arms and sit back. No, they got to take an active part, and that's going to involve not only a lot of pushback, but a lot of really strange, awkward conversations with people in power, with the public, in the public eye, and they were going to be constantly sort of fighting a war in terms of public relations.
Which you're going to cover fairly well in your new series as well.
Yeah. And kind of already started with the collab with Lizard Wizard.
Which is really good, which we're going to talk about here somewhere.
Yeah.
We don't have a whole lot of articles in Vanguard outside of the 95,000 word starter, so we can talk about them.
Yeah. And, in a lot of ways, I hope that this serves, the few hundred people that listen on a weekly basis, thank you so much, to maybe inspire, getting some more people in there to try and tell stories in Vanguard, because it's very open. As much as we are trying to make a curated canon, I have been very involved with everyone that has approached me at talking about writing something in Vanguard, we are there as a supportive function. I'm glad to offer, even though I'm not on the Butterfly Squad anymore, I'm glad to offer crit and to brainstorm with anybody that wants to talk about Vanguard, because there's a lot of stories that can be told. We are not just telling one central storyline. It's a setting, and it can fit all sorts of different narratives, and I think that's the most exciting thing. And maybe kind of segueing into a discussion of like what sort of stories we kind of see moving forward, not just the ones that we want to write, but what kind of things can this setting be a good placement for.
I hate to start this segment with a tangent, but there is a part of my brain.
No, you don't.
Yeah. There's a part.
That was just the boilerplate.
There's a part of my brain that is wondering, and I'm sure a certain someone has asked a question that is probably similar to this. Who Vikander Need would be making fun of in the Vanguard split?
Yeah, actually, a lot of people have asked that question, and I have answered it by saying, I don't know.
You don't know till you write it.
Yeah, well, that's, you jokingly sent a message in the chat here about people asking what happens to blank in Vanguard. Well, we'll tell you when we write about it.
Yeah, of course.
Or when anyone writes about it, because
like a couple of days ago, weeks. Time is meaningless in the void we float in now. But we talked for the first time about what sites and areas and outposts would be called by Vanguard. That had never come up, and it's been like a year.
Yeah, development has been a little slow for many, many reasons on and off Wiki. But
it's piecemeal.
Yeah, it is not for lack of interest in any regard.
Yeah, that's why I want us, this to serve a little bit as a call to action.
Come right in our canon. It's cool. Yeah, it's called No Return. It's great.
The reason that I, had not yet brought up that discussion about what sort of terminology changes there would be was because I've been mostly focused on the immediate transition period for Vanguard, because I think that's, at least for myself, that's the most interesting. And so I've kind of established this idea that there's an interim board made up of people that were at Emissary, in that conversation, at least some of them, who are, just trying to they're putting out fires at this point. They're trying to figure out how they exist as an organization while moving forward in the public eye.
I want to see people writing VNP, Vanguard Normalization Protocol main list entries or a GOI format. I want to see people actually write these things, and I also want to see one of those people be me, but I'm having trouble convincing myself to do the things that I want to do, because that's how being creative works sometimes.
Yeah, I think, some of the reason why it's been slow has, I think it's in a lot of ways very challenging because we have learned how to write things for the wiki that are, at its central core. A lot of these storylines are about the idea of containment. That's a central tenet. And what Vanguard does is like completely blow that out of the water and ask, the reader and the person who's writing it to think of an alternative motivations, not just the altruistic, but also how would somebody experience or, how would someone deal with this problem? Recently, Lizard Wizard came up with, and I ended up stepping in to help write, this idea of how would Vanguard actually normalize something? And, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that asks, a very inherent question that I think is probably in some ways intimidating. I certainly find it so, and I've written several things for it. But, it challenges that core concept of what we've all learned how to read and write on the wiki, which is why I find it so fascinating. But also, it's challenging.
Yeah, the VNP that I wrote is contained within Voyager, and it ends up being not just about informing people outside of the Foundation, but also informing people within the Foundation who maybe were, also being disinformed by administration. Specifically, there's an individual who's really important to the history of Harry's site and canon, Site 43, and this individual has kind of been locked up underground, and is not mentally well and is being abused by the Foundation essentially for scientific and technological profit, and everyone in the site is being misinformed about where those profits are coming from and how the Foundation is getting them and what has happened to the individual who's trapped down there. And all of that is unjust, and all of that again comes from the Foundation thinking that it's uniquely suited to solve all of the things without having to tell anyone that it's solving all of the things. And so what immediately happens, or maybe not immediately, but soon after the dissolution of the Foundation and in this putting out fires period, comes a story or a sort of microcosm of a larger story where the Foundation has to inform everybody what they've been doing. Like, even people who are, maybe transitioning into Vanguard, like what they've been doing. And there's sort of like levels of internal veil that we see manifested through with like security clearance levels.
Right, absolutely.
Right.
And as those internal, veils come down, we see like a lot of like, I won't exactly spoil it, but something pretty bad happens to this character that's been trapped down there for so long, and it's a direct result of the Foundation's willingness to just prolong the inevitable, for lack of a better word. I mean,
that's why it's there. That's why the word's in the title. You're not just being coy. That's what it's about. It's about change being inevitable.
Yeah. So
Spoiler alert, everyone. That's why it's called that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not a fucking Thanos reference.
Nope. No, for crying out loud. But God, I think like that's
low-hanging fruit.
That's one subsection of the type of stories that we want to see, is not only the Foundation, like or Vanguard rather, breaking the Foundation's misdeed to the greater world, but also breaking the Foundation's misdeed to other parts of the Foundation.
Yeah,
absolutely. I've already kind of started touching on that a little bit with my series that I've been doing in it. The internal security clearances, and all those RISA notifications and all the, you can only unlock this collapsible if you're cleared for this level. Those all represent a level of internal deceit by omission within the Foundation of all the different researchers that aren't aware. It's why I thought it was such a brilliant idea in the original SCP, for 6500, to be able to state that all of this has been made not public, but like cleared to like level 1. Everyone is aware of this now. We are telling everyone in the organization because it's that important.
Ooh, well, that's a good quick thing for me to chime in. I've only written one VNP too, and you don't remember that I wrote one. I VNP'd SCP-6500 in the ending to SCP-6500.
I do remember now.
And in that file, they basically go, "It was us."
Yeah.
And of course, the threshold version of SCP-6500's update at the end is them going, "Some people say it was us, but it fucking wasn't. They don't know what they're talking." So in the Vanguard version, they literally go, "Yeah, that thing that was killing everything, mea culpa."
Yeah, and
that's the difference.
And it's a primary point of contention between Vanguard and the Global Occult Coalition in my series and in the collab with Lizard Wizard, because the GOC does not accept that. Does not think they think that the Foundation is just lying again, that it's that the Vanguard is just a big PR gambit or something. They just don't trust the fact that that Vanguard is saying, no, listen, containment is the problem.
Yeah, like that's one big thing I had to kind of stop myself from commenting about earlier, is that like when this starts, like a lot of the skeptical GOIs, which are most of them, see this as a ploy by the Foundation to rebrand and to, you know, keep maintaining their control. Like it's just the Foundation in a different suit, and it's decidedly not. And one really important way that I think Harry like really elegantly and in a nuanced way communicates this in that VNP 6500 like mini file is that he doesn't like have the Vanguard point at the Foundation and be like, it's the Foundation that did it, and they used to do bad things, and it's good that they're not around anymore, and we're just this new organization that sprung up out of nowhere. Like, that would be disingenuous. But no, they say, like, we used to be the Foundation, and we did bad things, and we're better now, or we're trying to be better now, and it's not just some ploy.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I find most interesting about the idea of those things I was mentioning earlier about that war in the court of public opinion, because they're the ones already undermining why the people should trust them, because they could take the easy way out. They could say, oh yeah, we're just, I don't know, this Foundation was a grand conspiracy, and we, you know, and they're very good at faking histories, at least they were before, so they could certainly do that, and instead members of Vanguard are being fairly transparent, because it's the whole fucking point.
Well, that's the beauty of it, is that they can't. Vanguard can't be. There can't be a sudden revelation that this was bullshit and they've been containing all along, and Vanguard is just a PR thing. Like, out of universe, that can't happen.
Right.
Because if they were doing that, the world would still be ending. So they literally have to be earnest, or this doesn't make... Like, Vanguard can't secretly still be acting like the SCP Foundation, or the impasse would not have stopped.
Yeah, a few people have talked to me about, like, Vanguard and, like, oh, well, they're, like, just, you know, they're so altruistic now. And I'm like, well, you know, they're just doing what's necessary. Like, I think it's important to look at the fact, you know, and it's because I'm so obsessed with, like, nuanced, grounded storytelling, that yes, their ideology now is certainly on its face more altruistic, and I wouldn't even debate that. But that's not really the motivation. The motivation is, if we don't do this, we don't have a choice. We're not just trying to stand up and say, look at us, we're here to save the world. No, it's the fact that, like, we were the problems, and if we don't fix this, it's all going to get fucked up again.
If we don't stop the problem, all of the things that we had a job to deal with will melt into goo, and we will not have a job and be war criminals.
Right. Yeah, now that they've opened up the floodgates, you know, it couldn't be a ploy, because now they're, like, remarkably, you know, on the hook for the things that are happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So are we going to talk about the articles or what?
Yeah, you know, and before we do that, for just a second, you know, I think the sorts of stories I envision here are not just dealing with previous SCPs and the Foundation, you know, and what is now Vanguard, dealing with the past sins of the Foundation, which is certainly something I find very interesting, or even the internal politics of the different GOIs, which is something I started addressing in the Sarkic stuff, because one of my main characters is, you know, a prominent Sarkic who is now dealing with other, you know, more marginalized Sarkic groups that don't trust the fact and think that, oh, you're just like shilling for the Foundation. The thing I really want to start to see is people talking, kind of fleshing out this world, because I think there's a lot of potential in not just dealing with the Foundation's past, but also, what things could be brought up in the future. It's why when you've said before how much it would be great to see a main list that was just from the beginning of the NP, and we're going to get there, and that's just going to be a brand new idea, a brand new anomaly that is dealt with not in terms of containment but in normalization.
Right,
is just so exciting.
For sure. Because
all the stories that could be told on the traditional SCP Wiki can be told in the setting of Vanguard. It's just a shifting of the priorities, really.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we do have some articles we could talk about here. Place, you have any last thoughts, kind of what we were just talking about?
No, I think you guys summed it up pretty well. I'm excited to get into a very Vanguard Christmas.
Yeah, so the first one we're going to talk about is the only main list article so far that is Vanguard connected, and that is SCP-6483, The Polar Express, by Lord XVNV and Ralston. And this is the third thing that Lord has involved himself with in our canon, although the one of them is a very funny tale that's also in Vanguard, and the other one is the 10th article, which was the threshold for when we could ask to be officially recognized as a canon.
Threshold.
That's right. Was Lord's wonderful parody of SCP-6500 in the form of a SPC, the Shark Punching Center article of 6500, which is not Vanguard, but is fucking hilarious.
See, Lord knew what was going on. Every canon has an impasse, and every impasse splits it into two timelines. Anyway, whatever. No, I'm
No. That's it. But yes, that totally fits. It's the thing. Not so long ago, somebody asked, "Well, is it really a multiversal crisis?" I'm like, yeah. One of the articles is clearly an example of that. SPC 6500. That's not in mainline.
We just have to contend with the conceit that like most of the timelines aren't actually depicted on the SCP Wiki or something like that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So because Lord so kindly chose to shitpost twice in our canon, this is the payback where we write a serious article about Santa Claus.
And it is a very serious article about Santa Claus, which is like, I've lost count, but I feel like there are like 4 or 5 main list articles about Santa Claus at this point.
Oh yeah.
But this
so
one
at least has an excuse for being separate. There's not a single Tim Allen reference.
That's right. That's thank God.
Unpersoned.
So this is an interesting conceit for an article because it starts off as a mainline SCP article and then deals with the transition. About halfway through, there is an offset which then turns the entire file into what the Vanguard would discuss this issue with. And it's also a crossover with the Chronicles of Site 120? No, Site 120 Archives? I'm trying to think of the official name of Ralston.
It is from 120's. It's from 120's archives. I'm pretty sure.
So Ralston has created this whole mythology and site history that has slowly blossomed into its own canon, which is all around Portland and magic and the Fae, and it's really rich. And
not Portland.
I said Poland.
You said Portland.
I don't think I did. Anyway, Poland.
Place.
Listen, Grigori's a lawyer. I was listening. I just don't know if I'm suited to tell him what he said.
It doesn't matter. Either way, I meant Poland if I said Portland.
He's just going to edit this out if it turns out that he said Portland.
No, I'm too lazy now. Now I'm working full time. I don't have time to do massive edits.
The longer
anymore.
we talk about it, the harder it is for him to edit it out.
Yeah, Harry's done that to me multiple times.
Yes, it's part of the joy of the podcast. It's a part of the brand. Go on.
But anyway,
talk about Portland.
What's wonderful about Ralston's Site 120 stuff is, at least ostensibly, and I'm not speaking for Ralston, Ralston has said this, going forward, Site 120 will be firmly entrenched in Vanguard, which is a wonderful, like just sign of trust in our canon. It's just kind of amazing to me that he's going to move forward. I'm really touched by that. Anyway, so this article is kind of about Santa. It's not actually about Saint Nick, but it's about an anomalous man who is a reality bender. And if listeners don't understand, reality benders are somebody that can literally change reality around them. Like, imagine godlike wizard powers, essentially. But very focused on this individual's portrayal of Santa Claus, because he changes his surroundings to Christmas themes. He teleports all over the place, especially the North and South Pole, and turns everything more Christmas-like, including manifesting holiday meals and making gifts pop out of thin air. And when people are around him, they slowly but surely feel like, suffused with the Christmas spirit and like, goodwill to all men or whatever. I'm a Jew, I don't know.
That was great. That was the outsider's perspective. That was good.
But what's interesting is that instead of taking this in a very silly way, which it seems like it might in the beginning, it's actually this really serious discussion of depression and finding one's purpose within a fairly dark and cynical world, because this person is very unhappy, especially once being contained, even though he has the ability to change his surroundings and disappear, because he feels more and more like he has no purpose. He's a divorced man with no children and has no real vocation, and what's interesting is that it starts progressing to the point where this person constantly is, his mental health is sort of declining, not in some dramatic, edgy way, but just in the sense that this person has relapses of depressive episodes and is, very unhappy with his lot in life. But the wholesome aspect is when it switches, and in a lot of ways this evokes kind of the optimism that we've been talking about with Vanguard, because it transitions to a Vanguard file, and then we get to follow his path into him finding a role not only in life but with Vanguard themselves, and a diplomatic role with a completely different canon, which is the Antarctic exchange. I just appreciate the incredible trust involved with not only developing a story like this, but setting it in our canon and then taking it so seriously, despite the fact that it's a story about Santa Claus.
Yeah, I think it does a really good job of demonstrating. I know we already talked about this, but the type of story we want to see, and what Vanguard is a useful framing device for, because it doesn't always have to be about yes, the framing device is about organizational change, institutional change, but it doesn't always have to be focused on the entire big picture all at once. Right. You can sit down with a single anomaly, and sometimes it's impossible for an anomaly to find a happy ending within the current foundation structure, or what I mean by that is when you're writing a certain story in the SCP universe about an anomaly, you come to a certain conclusion that it actually makes more sense for the change that the anomaly goes through, or the sort of moral of the story that you kind of want to communicate, to be communicated through a changing of the institution, if you want to have your story have a happy ending, and you want to sort of explore this idea of actually it's not always the individual that needs to change, or the individuals that fucked up and misinterpreted how an anomaly needs to be treated, or any of those things. Sometimes the individuals are really all doing the best they can, and they're in an unfortunate system that you can change as a writer. You can use this framing device to show people how an organization would how a different organizational structure, a different institutional structure would be better in this specific case. And then that's a microcosm of the entire thing we're trying to do with Vanguard as a whole.
Yeah, I thought it like you said, I thought it did a really excellent job of exhibiting exactly why this is such an interesting setting, and why, and how you can utilize the Vanguard framework, because you're right, this is very focused on, there's some good world building in this article, but it's very focused on the personal, on the very small microcosm of one individual's life, and his connection to those people that are at first containing him, and then later on helping to not only normalize but also give him, a purpose, a greater purpose, that isn't just becoming some sort of special agent or whatever, like you would see in Resurrection.
Yeah.
The contrast between the two halves of this is just so brilliant. It's so completely different. You open the second half and you're like, this is going to be slightly different. Is it? No, this is a completely different thing. And I really like this article. It's really good.
Yeah, it's terrific. And I just appreciate so much that it's, the one non-tail so far that is concerned with Vanguard. And I thought they both just did, Ralston and Lord just did such a terrific job of,
they did. Said, it's amazing.
The fact that our one main list article so far is about Santa, but caveat, it's not silly. It's not a goofy, Christmas is the best thing. No. This is a very serious discussion of and not grimdark serious, just a very human discussion about human failings, and like you said, the personal kind of effect that a change in an institutional change could have on a small story, on a personal story. And then, unfortunately, it's my turn to sound self-serving, because
it's a collab. It's fine.
Yeah, well, this one is. So, Lizard Wizard, a few months back, came to, us in general. We have kind of a side Discord server where we all kind of talk about things. About
behind all your backs.
That's right. And you can't join, sorry, where kind of tackling the actual logistics of normalization, only not from a doctor's perspective, not from some agent's perspective, but from the perspective of the public eye. And she had this really interesting perspective of an epistolary, not novel, but story, where it's all news reports and public think pieces dealing with this crisis, and the push-pull between Vanguard and the GOC, dealing with a fairly well-known Series 1 SCP, which is SCP-939 with many voices. And Liz had the brilliant idea that I've never stopped congratulating her on, of titling it With Many Choices, which I just fucking love that title.
Yes.
So yeah, it is just a series of very short newspaper articles, both from punditry, but also in a more neutral voice of reporting on kind of the ground's eye view of how a normalization about one specific anomaly would go. And if you don't know, SCP-939 is a horrible murder monster, essentially, or a species of murder monsters that likes to hunt people by mimicking their voices, and how the Foundation, Vanguard, would portray this anomaly in a way that is not just demonizing, but then also wants to inform and protect society. I liked it enough to join in when Liz was asking for a little bit of help with writing it. And the thing that I find most interesting is that what I've said sort of from the beginning, and certainly implied in Emissary, was that there's going to be a lot of pushback and maybe even open hostility between the GOC and Vanguard. And this really does a good job, because I never wanted to portray that hostility in terms of an open armed conflict, even though that could happen sometimes, but instead be, in that court of public opinion. And so there's really an exercise in like propaganda for both sides, and neither side really wins, although it does end up in a way that makes a little more sense for the Vanguard's perspective. But the whole problem is that from the beginning Vanguard has fucked it up.
I like the way that plays out here, and I like the way it plays out in the Clef and Varys stuff that you wrote as well, because the thing about this is that even though from our perspective, because our perspective is de facto the Foundation's perspective, the GOC is that other group who's opposed and does things a different way that we sometimes work with. From a global morality perspective, except for where they're just massacring shit, they are generally in their day-to-day actions the moral one from the perspective of most of normal humanity, as defined by the Foundation as normal. And in the Vanguard thing, the GOC has now been switched off into being not the moral one out of the pairing, and they're clearly not taking that well.
Right. Yeah, and I mean...
They're not the good guys anymore if they ever were, and they're like, this kind of sucks. You guys are pretending to be the really nice guys, and now you're saying that we're stuck in the mud. That sucks.
Yeah, and they're put in a bad position of being outed because their organization, the GOC, was essentially acknowledged in public by Vanguard in a very public way in my second Clef and Varys story.
Yes.
The thing I find so interesting about it is that I'm not, or at least I don't want to set up the GOC as like quote-unquote bad guys, but instead just an opposing force, because their priorities, their ideologies are not like copacetic with what Vanguard is going for, because they've never been about, as much as they're interested in research and education within their organization, they've also been very concerned with maintaining the Veil.
Absolutely.
And if they can't exist like that anymore because the Veil is now, blown out of the water, what role would they pick? And still being concerned with the eradication of threats, they would still be fairly opposed to the preservationist perspective of Vanguard, because the Vanguard is, not certainly about, because in this story, with many choices, Vanguard is, eradicating some of the anomalies because of their danger, but in the idea of preserving that ecosystem we've talked about before. Mm-hmm. Whereas GOC is like, ecosystem, go fuck yourselves. Like, we need to kill these things. They're murder monsters.
Destroy, destroy, destroy.
And there's also something to be said about, like, the GOC, generally, even if it's not gonna let, like, all of the, even if it's going to maintain some version of the Veil in a pre-Vanguard society or in a pre-Impasse society, it's like allowing representatives from like basically every sort of organization that sees itself as representing humanity or some form of humanity, right? Aside from the Foundation because of the direct conflict, but like it's got that Council of 108 that are like all making decisions, and I assume one or more of that Council of 8 is representatives of the United States government, and one of them is representative of this anomalous community and that anomalous community and this GOI and all of those things. And even though the GOC, like, definitely is, below Vanguard on the rung of, like, our personal definition of what we think is a more moral or more altruistic or more just solution here, like, you can definitely say, like, they're letting more of humanity or more of humanity's representatives have a say about what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, they've just seen the heel take the face heel turn, and they didn't just become the villains just because they're opposed to the Foundation, because having villains in this kind of organizational structure would not be as interesting as having opponents who both have a point sometimes.
And part of the point of the Vanguard split is like no one is actually, or like I say no one, but like obviously there are some people who are really genuinely evil and malicious, but they're like the vast minority. Like most people think they are doing things that are good, and like most people who are running these big organizations that the Foundation demonizes or the Vanguard demonizes or like whatever, like the whole point is that Vanguard is seeing all of these people as equal in its set of people that it has to try and protect and inform, and like it is, willing to sit down with the people who are upset and who are yelling and aren't necessarily being productive, and say, like, I'm going to hear your side of the story, and I'm going to try and understand how we can be better for you, because even though you're being obnoxious, hypothetically, like, you are part of the set of people that we're trying to help, instead of the Foundation's approach of just like, you don't know what's good for you, we know what's good for you, we'll do it, like, right?
Yeah. I think that's actually a pretty good transition, honestly, to talking about my Sarkic stuff, because that is, in my opinion, it's something that I've focused a lot on. I've brought it up multiple times in this podcast, not just this episode, obviously, that I'm a huge fan and proponent of Sarkicism on the wiki, because I find them so compelling.
Really?
Yeah, I know, shocking. But the thing I thought was most interesting about Sarkicism was that diaspora and all these different aspects of different cultures, even though some of them have been portrayed, reasonably so, as, pretty much black and white bad guys. It's hard to argue that SCP-2480 or 2408 are good in any way. There's really doesn't seem to be any altruistic aspects of them. But a little bit of an origin story. So I'm talking about the article Sarkic Heat, which I wrote, and it stars Dr. Clef and Karsis Varis, who is SCP-2075. And the reason that I decided to write this is I think it was after the voting period had closed and we were officially 6,500 and people started really kind of paying attention to it in a lot of ways. On the wider, not just on the site, but off the site as well. And somebody had made a meme, or I had made a meme, I don't remember, on Reddit about it, and somebody commented that I should write, or the general, maybe not just me, but should write a buddy cop comedy with Clef and Varis, like buddy cop comedy with Clef and Varis when, yes. And I just immediately was like, oh yeah, you're right, that needs to be told. That story needs to be told. And so I contrived a reason to bring those two very different characters together outside it, because they did interact in Emissary, but in, essentially Tildamoose, who is involved in the leadership of Vanguard, kind of sends Varis and Clef to deal with, essentially it's a good PR move for Vanguard to get in good with the Russian federal government, because there are so many different SCPs that are, contained within Russia, and normalization can no longer happen without the partnership of, leadership within, mundane government and corporate organizations. And so to convince, the Russian authorities that Vanguard is someone to be trusted, they want to have a very public win. And so what is one of the more public facing anomalies within SCP universe in Russia is SCP-2408, which is essentially a Sarkic organized crime ring that does human trafficking and human sacrifice and all sorts of horrible things. And ostensibly it was a chance to tell a story about addressing head on the fact that there's this secret cult running a very organized criminal conspiracy in the heart of Russia, and kind of pull the rug out from underneath the idea of what that story might be, because instead of them invading and attacking, although stuff like that does happen, it ends in a very diplomatic way, because from the very beginning I've wanted to start talking about Sarkicism in a slightly more optimistic perspective than a lot of the traditional stuff is talked on the wiki, because I find them such a compelling group, because in a lot of ways they are a marginalized, small religious group like the Jews, although there's not a lot of connection in terms of ideology. And
you can't do meat magic?
No, unfortunately not. There is Jewish magic, but I won't tell you what it is.
I was really counting on you being able to do meat magic. I'm kind of upset now.
Yeah. Well,
I thought Jewish magic was like writing abilities.
and accounting.
Okay.
I'm allowed to say it.
That's no fair making jokes no one else can make. That's not fair.
And, on the wiki, a lot of the stuff that I really love has portrayed Sarkics in a very negative light. A lot of metaphysician stuff has treated them not just in the interesting, compelling, nuanced way that he has used in different perspectives, but some of the more famous articles are portraying Sarkics as just like plain-ass evil. And I thought, what an interesting way to show the potential for Vanguard's more optimistic perspective. In dealing with PR is addressing directly one of those like just morally black SCPs, and
to do it with a buddy cop story where you take the abrasive, doesn't get along with anybody, hillbilly cop hero of the SCP Foundation and stick him in there with the Karcist to broker that deal. It's a good microcosm and macrocosm for how Vanguard can bring these groups together and force them to work together with their teeth grit.
Yeah. And I've written a follow-up, and I'll be writing more because I really want to kind of directly address the fact that the Sarkics have mostly been pushed to the margins of both in-world fiction and out of universe, kind of the way it's treated on the wiki in some ways. And I thought it would be very interesting to set up, what if there was, if Foundation can reform itself, well, why couldn't the Sarkic world as well? And if I was going to bring in the more palatable Sarkics into Vanguard, why couldn't we do that for the ones that are a little scarier as well?
Right.
Which has been interesting and a bit of a challenge, but go ahead.
I don't think there's a single thing I could say about Sarkicism that you wouldn't be able to correct me on. But one thing that comes to mind is that it seems pretty evident to me based on the things I've read, which is mostly the hub and your stuff and not a lot outside of that, as opposed to Sarkics being the bad guys as a whole, which is how unfortunately they're portrayed a lot of the time, it seems pretty clear to me that the Neo-Sarkics are the bad guys, and the normal Sarkics, there should be kind of more articles looking at conflict between those two sort of, I don't know if sects is even SECTS is even the right word, because the Neo-Sarkics are just wealthy non-believers who are just using the magic system for their own gain, as opposed to really being believers. And I'm probably wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm probably wrong.
No, you're right.
Yeah,
that's correct.
And as opposed to looking at conflict between those groups, there's just this tendency to be just write off the whole thing as weird flesh magic, and write these articles about you probably know the one I'm talking about. I can't remember which number it is off the top of my head, but the article where a really popular Sarkist figure, old Sarkist figure, is visited by modern Sarkics and is I don't recognize any of this shit you guys are doing. That's fucked up, etc. And it's kind of you're just using the whole thing as a punching bag, as opposed to actually really digging into what the ideologies here are and what this is a metaphor for and what the authors were trying to do when they originally came up with this GOI, etc.
Yeah,
I know what that one is. Is it a Kinch the Knife Blade tale? It's a tale somebody wrote where some Neo-Sarkics literally come knocking on their door, right?
I believe it was an SCP actually, but yes, that's what I'm talking about.
I think the tale might be connected to it.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the number or the name of the tale off the top of my head, but that all sounds right. Yeah, I mean, I think kind of inherent to the world that Metaphysics set up is this very misunderstanding of both in-universe, but then outside of it as well, of this group that is, looked at from the outside is all one universal sort of thing. But even within the hub, it makes it very clear, no, that's not true. They're not. They're very different. And, the people in universe have always treated them kind of as one, well, look at all these things, these horrible things you've done. And I thought it was really interesting to directly address that, because I'm not trying to redeem the quote-unquote bad guy SCP Sarkics, but also to state that both of these articles that I address, which is 2408 and 2480, are about communities that have been influenced by a few charismatic, oppressive people, and really just used for the pursuit of power. And I thought it would, be a perfect opportunity to, because I wouldn't want to write, a spiritual rewrite of either of these articles. I fucking love these articles. But instead, in our weird, alternative universe canon, if we had somebody involved with the Vanguard who was intimately aware of the Sarkic world, how would that person go about what was not only what he thought was best for his people, but also, in addressing the more dangerous, questionable aspects of it? Because that's something that I brought up right from the beginning in Emissary was, okay, if we're going to bring Sarkics into our organization, what about all these horrible things that have been connected to you over the years? And so I think Varys is slowly but surely becoming kind of not a messianic figure, but like a point of representation or grassroots kind of like movement to get the Sarkic world more involved with each other and also more in line with the Vanguard goals.
And it's so telling how willing the Foundation is to just go you guys are Sarkics, and Sarkics have done bad things in the past, so you guys are bad. And but then they don't, until they have to become Vanguard, they don't see the same thing with them. It's the Foundation has done bad things, therefore the Foundation is bad. Right.
But it's okay because they know what's best.
Yeah. And that's the whole point. That's why we did all this. That's why all of this is important, is to not let any of that go unaddressed.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I've been using it for, and I hope to see others do the same thing.
For sure.
Okay, so just before we get to emails, there are a few things. I want to kind of say that I'm going to continue writing about Clef and Varys. Obviously, I'm really enjoying that. But also, I want to write a follow-up to Path of Cleric with Kato and Fumiko in Vanguard, because I think, first of all, I really like those characters, and I would like to see them further develop. And also, I think that they're perfect because one is a Foundation agent, now Vanguard agent, and the other one is a Serpent's Hand, Buddhist warrior monk. And what a perfect, again, duo to kind of show the different aspects of this changing world.
For sure.
Obviously, as we mentioned earlier, Ralston's from Site 120 archives will, as far as I understand it, at least the things that are going further into the future will be intimately tied to Vanguard. He's continued doing that. Something that he submitted for the Department Con was a Vanguard related article. I also am in talks and collabing again with Wizard, because she had this wonderful idea of addressing what growing pains the Serpent's Hand was going to experience, because as the Black Queen and other prominent members of Serpent's Hand start bringing in different cells into Vanguard, how would all of the Serpent's Hand come with? Probably not. There would probably be a little more militant or zealot group that just thinks, hey, the Foundation's just pulling the wool over everyone's eyes and leading to conflict there within the internal organization. But yeah, also just this is just a wide open invitation for come workshop ideas with us. We're all in SCPD Discord and other SCP related Discords, and I am certainly, I won't speak for both of you, but I'm certainly very interested in talking with anybody about it. I love this stuff.
Absolutely, for sure.
Okay, so we actually got a bunch of emails this time, which is
Holy
awesome.
cow.
Yeah, we got 5 emails. Yeah.
Holy shit.
Which is awesome and really exciting because I really love the emails. So our email is simplycreativepeople@gmail.com. Feel free to hit us with any questions or, whether it's about our upcoming subjects or just anything that we've talked about or anything to do with writing or the SCP universe. First one's from Randy. I really enjoy your podcast, but when I saw that you were Explorer Vanguard, I went, well, would be a great one. Well, thanks. SCP-6500 and No Return Hub were quite an experience, and I always wanted to hear more about it. Of course, I would bring you all a question. Do you have an article that you had to do a stupid amount of research for?
Do I have one that I didn't? No, you go ahead.
I think Harry should start with whichever one took the most. Because I think you've done more than either of us.
Well, I'm still thinking about my answer because I forgot to read that part of the outline ahead of time. So somebody else cover for me.
Okay. Place, you want to go or you want me to go?
I'm scanning my author page real quick.
Okay, well, I've got an answer prepped. So the one that comes to mind for me is my third article, which is SCP-5512, which is intimately about cults, and instead of just making spooky icky cult story, I decided to do a shit ton of research about real life cults, including reading transcripts from Jonestown and other cults and from cult leaders, because I wanted to portray the cult leader in that article in a very realistic fashion in both not only the ideologies presented, but also the cadence of speech. And I've been rewarded by several people telling me that they were very disturbed by, even though there's no horror involved with the cult leader's speeches in front of his congregation, they were very disturbed by the very realistic and like a manipulative way that the cult leader speaks, and so I found that very complimentary. But I did actually read through extensive transcripts of the guy that I forget his name, Jonestown. I know it was Jones, but I forget his
Jim
name.
Jim Jones.
Thank you. Drank the Kool-Aid. That guy. One of his last speeches was recorded and was found after the terrible tragedy of all those people dying. And I didn't want to demean, I'm not making light of that event, but I wanted my cult leader to feel in some ways very similar in that engaging sort of organic back and forth manipulation of building up and then also pushing his congregation kind of down because they obviously need him to lead them into the light.
Right.
So yeah, my answer would be SCP-5512.
Well, actually, I did think of it, and my answer, because I just can never take a question on the level at which it was posed, is 2 connected articles, 5382 and 6382. 5382 is largely about pseudo-scientific remedies and diseases that don't necessarily even exist that people think they have, combining. And I had to research an absolutely obscene number of those in order to keep referencing them over the course of a story that takes about 100 years to unfold, plus several hundred years before that actually they find out at the end. So hundreds of years of science, pseudo-science, and pseudo-illness, and all of that. And I did an absolutely obscene amount of research for that. But then it was nothing compared to the research that 6382 required, the long, far-flung sequel to that, which required me to use locations and characters and items from all 16 language branches of the SCP wikis, which took just so much effort and time. And I did screw up a few things, which people were helpful enough to point out to me, but overall I found it was very rewarding to do all that research. And of course I had already started doing that research with my Time After Time Password series, where I did that same process researching everybody else's sites on the English language wiki and a few foreign language wikis. And I thought, all right, if I'm going to start referencing some of the foreign from the English perspective branches, why the fuck not just do every single one of the official branches? So I'll do Vietnamese stuff and Chinese stuff and Japanese stuff, and I just poured them all in there. And it took an immense amount of time to do all of that reading, and I did make some mistakes, but overall I'm glad that I did it.
That's fucking awesome.
Is your answer fun. Not time after time password as a whole because it's like not one article?
Yeah.
Like I assume that was more.
That would, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just.
That's the reason I didn't. Otherwise, I would have picked that because yes,
right.
That took so much research. It essentially destroyed a year of my life.
Just right. That was just for my own curiosity. Okay, so
I had to read everybody's fucking stuff.
Excuse me. In general,
he's getting ready, folks.
In general, I kind of I tend to only write about stuff that. Yes, I had to do a lot of research for, but I didn't do it like for an article. It's just something that I got into because I have lots of diverse interests. So like a part of me wants to say like 5241 in my AIAD series because that all heavily leans on like actual real like problems in AI safety and machine intelligence and all of those things. But like the one that I actually had to sit down and be like, okay, I have to read a bunch of shit so that I can write the article. Was like almost certainly my proposal. I felt the need to like read every other proposal beforehand, and there were some of them I hadn't read because my proposal is a meta critique of proposals and the way that they're treated on the wiki. I don't know if you knew. I think it's pretty obvious. Some people don't. But
some people really don't know. Their reaction to your proposal. I've had conversations with people that almost turn into arguments in places. I'm like, it's meant to reference them. Like it's directly referencing several proposals because it's a direct commentary on them.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into it like, I can have a whole 3-hour podcast about my proposal, but I've already done that before on the Special Containment podcast, so you should go check that out. But also, it's just not something I'm really interested in rehashing. But that one I had to do definitely several hours of research for, and it was also the third project I put on the wiki, so it was quite daunting.
Worked out though.
I mean,
in my opinion, it worked out.
No, I mean, and not just because I know it was controversial at first, but it's doing quite well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 156 now, which some people are like, if your proposal is only at 150 after a year, you should delete it. And to those people, I say, you spend too much time on the fucking SCP wiki. Let me tell you. But anyway,
but not enough time actually voting because let's face it, readership has been down for months and months.
It'll pick up once we get the next 100 or 200 SCPs in because we are presently 350 SCPs away from fielding the series, which means we're 250 SCPs away from 7Con.
I'm not ready for another. I'm not ready for another K-Con. I can't write another novel.
Wine.
I can't.
I don't.
We just got a 3-hour conversation about the last one.
Yes, and in hindsight, it's wonderful.
As long as it's something that already happened, it isn't still happening.
I'm very proud of what we already did. I don't want to think about what what any of us individually or together would do. Okay, I'm tired.
Oh, guys, just from the bottom of my heart, with just so much affection, I can't even believe how it makes my heart burst to say it. It was great working with you guys, and I'm doing the next one by myself. Fuck you.
Yeah, same here. Actually, on this contest tangent, I don't even know if I'm interested in participating in contests, period, from now on. I will probably do
every
stuff...
contest that's happened. So.
I will probably do stuff like JamCon still, but it's I wanted to do DepCon, but the, just the way it started to work, and has started to work in the past 6 months, 8 months or so that I've been doing stuff, is I have big plans, and if I try to fit them into working with contest stuff, it's going to compromise my plans. And if I try to write other stuff for the contest, it's going to take time away from my plans. And it's do I care enough about the possibility or the impossibility of getting first place when I could be doing stuff that, matters more to me, frankly.
Yeah, it's definitely a matter of picking your individual priorities, like how we've spent this long on the first of 5 emails.
Oh yeah!
With that, Harry, why don't you read the next one?
Okay. The next one is from the first one you read was from Randy.
Right.
The next one is from a name that I feel deeply an affinity for, Sarcastalot. Hey, I'm loving the show so far. Do you have advice on new people getting something out there? I have been trying for months to get greenlit on a concept. Ooh, sympathies. And every time I get a concept up, it either goes under the radar or advice of more detail in this 400-word cap concept phase. Is it better to connect them to already existing assets? Like what made me come back to SCP as a whole was listening to other podcasts about Sarcasm or Nalka, depending on who you ask, Church of the Broken God, and Alagata. Or is it better to pull a random one-off something? Both ways haven't worked and I feel defeated. Love the show so far. So, how do we get new stuff out there? Do you connect it to old stuff? Do you make a new thing? That's the question.
I mostly always advise, from the Butterfly Squad stuff and the, hundreds of pieces of crit I gave on idea posts, was not just to tie it to something existing. Now you can if you have a fresh take on something, and that really does work, but don't do it just to try and get more attention. I think I don't know, I haven't looked at Sarcastalot's post, but and by the way, Sarcastalot, you can if you want to reach out, I will gladly look at your idea if you want to talk about it. But I think the problem with the idea posts and greenlighting in general is there's only so many volunteers. So you can't trust that someone will find it organically. So you need to reach out to reviewers. You need to go into the Discords. You need to ask people to take a look at it. And you need to take crit, in a serious fashion. Because it could be that the ideas you've posted, I'm not saying one way or the other, but it could be that it was lacking in something. That request for more detail might be, as simple as, hey, can you clarify what you mean for me here? Because a lot of times I would see people complain about the 400-word cap. And I get that, but I want to point out that the reason that it's there is to force yourself to work under a creative limitation such that you can sell that to your concept to people that have already written on the wiki. Right. And I realize it can be painful, and it was for me too. And maybe you don't want to go about it. There are other ways to do it, but if you are going to do it, you need to reach out. You can't just hope that someone will find it. You've got to talk to people about it.
Yep. And make sure it's something that you feel some interest in. So that's another argument against doing the just find something that's already on the site and write about it. Well, if you feel strongly about something that's already on the site, then do that. But if the idea you have is an idea that's coming out of your head that matters to you, write about that before anything else, because if you care about it, it will be better. And then follow the advice Grigori gave.
Also, just as a follow-up, if you are finding that your ideas are not really getting the sort of traction that you would like, there is always a piece of advice that I give to people constantly, or at least I was when I was doing more crit, which is go and read more, because it could be such that your idea that you think is really fresh is maybe not as fresh as you think. I'm not trying to imply that sarcasm you have a bad idea. That's not it at all. I'm just saying that sometimes it is better to go out there and consume more and absorb it, not just for entertainment's sake, but also for technique. You might want to take a look at other people's idea posts, not for ideas, not to take their ideas, but to see which ones worked, how they portrayed their ideas. And sometimes when somebody asks you for more detail, there's 400-word cap, but that doesn't mean you can't expound upon it in response to that request. Beyond the word cap.
For sure.
I think you guys have covered a lot of my thoughts, but I really quickly want to say a couple things. The first thing being, developing your voice or style in any art form requires emulating things that you think are cool. And I don't mean like writing about the same content that other people have written about necessarily, like these GOIs that you mentioned in your question, but I mean writing style and tone and the sort of the vibe that you get from people. And sometimes you get that from like sitting down and really closely looking at exactly what other people are doing, why it works for you and why it doesn't work for you. And sometimes it can be hard to figure that stuff out on your own. I am fortunate to come from a background where I have to do a lot of literary analysis and where I had to write a lot of essays and where I sort of have an intuitive understanding of clinical tone for various reasons. And I found that the green light system was not a good system for me to get my ideas approved or for me to get critique on my ideas. My first ever draft idea was an 079 rewrite, and that draft did not it was not good, I'll be honest. But like what I really learned is it's really important to like go and figure out whose opinions you value, whether that's like just based on analyzing their writing or whether you're actually able to talk to them in a Discord or something, whose opinions you value, and like not letting too many cooks stir the pot when you feel sort of sure of your idea and you're passionate about it. The green light system is great for some people, and I don't want to discount the very good and thankless work that a lot of people do there. It's all really important, and I'm really glad that service exists. It's just not for everyone.
No, yeah, it isn't. And you know, I think the like Harry was saying, the passion you have for the idea goes a long way. So if you are writing something or your proposed idea is really just because you're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, you might want to hold pause and see if you can't, ruminate on something that you give a crap about. Not just about an anomaly and what you think would be cool, but also, what sort of narrative and discussion you want to talk about, like what gets you going.
And maybe once you've written enough, you'll actually find that sometimes you get to write those things that are like, wouldn't it be cool if I smashed these two things together? And then people will trust you enough to actually read it. Like when I threw 682 in a canyon with 35 on his face.
Or when I threw 682 in a giant ball that exploded.
Fuck, that article has a higher rating than anything I've written. It's a really good article. I
appreciate it. I don't know if it's because the wind blew a certain way the day that it was posted or what.
It's crazy good. It's a crazy article.
Yeah, it's very really good. Shut up.
Thank you. Thank you.
But we're talking about 6820, which is only good because he was gonna call it like 682 or some stupid shit like that. I said, take 6820, you idiot.
Yeah, I'm mad that I almost passed up that opportunity. I'm mad actually that article was almost just a really high effort termination attempt added to the end of the termination attempts list instead of being a main list article. But
instead of being an article that's now at 517.
Yeah, but
wow.
It took the fuck off. Yeah.
I knew it was up there. I just didn't. Wow, that's almost as high.
It's almost as high as inevitable. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on.
Anyway.
So Guezma writes in again and says, my opinion of Vanguard is I love it a whole bunch. I think Inevitable is my favorite article on the site. I'm a big fan of what's been done in No Return so far, including Threshold. But I just like Vanguard more because of personal preferences. I mean, come on, it has the Malkins. Guezma is also a big fan of Sarcasm, like I am. I love that it's an effort for a better world, which is to face hardships and acknowledge past wrongdoings. It's interesting to see what has to be done against the consequences of hiding and suppressing the anomalous for so long. So yeah, I'm a Vanguard fan, always looking forward to the next stories, and I got something planned to write for it. Awesome, because Guezma just posted his first one, and it's fucking dope. It's about French frog people living underneath France and being terribly scared of the French because of the reputation of French wanting to eat frogs. It's fucking great. And Guezma's from France, so it's not like just talking about some other culture. It's very funny and very good. It has a really upsetting. It has a really upsetting. I don't know. I'll have to look it up, and I'll put it in the item description. Playing too much.
In the item description.
Oh dear. I gotta put that on my list.
Yeah, it's really funny, and the end of it is like hauntingly funny. Like it's like upsetting. Anyway, okay. Let's see. Place, you want to read this one from Guari?
Guari is how I will pronounce it. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. I've double checked with them.
Fantastic.
It's how Grigori pronounces it that makes it canonical.
Guari writes, I almost forgot to write a comment for this episode. I don't have much to say about Vanguard for obvious reasons, but so far I've been really liking the no return canon, especially as it centers more on the societal and sociological consequences of anomalies being public, as opposed to broken masquerade. These last few weeks, I've been reading the canon On Guard 43, I think they mean. And since you three are very skilled authors, I cannot wait to see what else you cook up. Thank you, Guari, for your comment.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And this one's really long, but honestly, it's just kind of amazing. So I'll read it. It's from Rise, or Reese, probably? I don't know.
I couldn't tell you how to pronounce that, which is funny, because it's one of my character's middle name.
Yeah, my brain says Riz.
I don't think it's Riz. It could be.
I think it's Welsh, which is why it's hard to read.
Yeah, it is. I think it is too.
Oh, so it's pronounced like square or something.
Right. The reason I say that it's Welsh is because it's also Dr. Riderick's middle name.
Yeah. No, but it is Welsh. First, just wanted to say I love the show and was hyped a couple of weeks ago when I first heard that two of my favorite authors on the site had made a whole ass podcast to talk about articles to check out, broader lore, writing content creation, etc. Oh, thanks. That's very, very nice. Honestly, I didn't read this one ahead of time. Seriously, I already told Harry this once, back when I sent him my second article ever, because I wanted to do something with Site 43. He was more helpful than I could have guessed, by the way. But OG 43 might be my favorite canon on the whole site. Rise says he finally started writing for the site about a month ago. Meanwhile, you, Grigori... Oh, no, I don't want to read this. Meanwhile, Grigori, mainly through Victim, have been one of my biggest influences on my admittedly still developing horror/humor writing style. This is very complimentary, thank you. To the point that I was specifically browsing Victim articles for inspiration when I first discovered the SCP Foundation. Wow, Jesus. Okay. But was still only writing short horror via creepypastas for Reddit. It's still weird for me to imagine you in the beginning worrying about being able to write anything comedic. I still worry about it. I still think I'm not funny. Anyway, I just finished the most recent episode, most recent episode, and I wanted to say that it really changed my understanding of Dr. Wondertainment. Oh, awesome. I always have been a little confused about why there seemed to be a real clash between variously malevolent, ambivalent, misguided, or even outright benevolent depictions of the character. Not gonna lie. In fact, if I'm being honest, I always much preferred the darker depictions. I'd read the more wholesome versions. Even when I thought such articles were good and well written, I still couldn't help but think, but why? Every time, in regard to stories showing the nicer side, it seemed, to me at least, to be neutralizing the most gripping parts of the character in order to focus on the good parts of the maniacal, magical robber baron of the toy industry, for reasons I couldn't begin to understand, and it kind of turned me off of it for a while. Listening to Dark Stuff's and y'all's discussion on the lighter side of Dr. Wondertainment, last episode, however, finally kind of get it, for lack of a better word, helped make nice Wondertainment seem like a more grounded and complex creative choice. I've been reading newer and rereading older WT stuff for the last couple days, and I can honestly say I think I understand it and enjoy it more than I did before. That's awesome. I even got inspired to write a Tiny Senora article when you all talked about that for a bit. That is especially awesome. Kinda rambling at this point, but good job, really good podcast, really insightful discussions, interesting content, and funny banter. Thank you. Can't wait.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is really... I just copy-pasted, but now I'm like kind of blushing. Can't wait to see what y'all...
thank you, because I do way too much banter. No, I'm kidding.
And they can't wait to see what we'll be covering over the next few episodes. Me too.
Now, if I had to guess, because of course this name that we've been given is not the name of their username on the site, I'm 95% sure this is Real Surreal Sir, whose article that they wrote for Vanguard 4.3 is SCP-5496, and I really like it, and it's deeply underread, so go read that.
Have I read it? Which one is that?
It's a Site 43 suggestion box.
Oh, dude, that one was so good.
Yeah, that one is really good.
If you wrote that and you're listening, you have the placeholder seal of approval. That was a great idea. I fucking love that article.
It was a great article, and the thing about me helping was just that there was one thing that didn't quite fit with canon, and they went and fixed it, so it's...
I do remember
anybody
this.
who hasn't read it should read it. It's really good. I really enjoyed it.
What's the number again?
5496.
Nice.
I'm like 95% sure that that's who Riss is here, because it's assonant with their name, and also I do have that PM of theirs saying that they really like the canon, so it's got to be there.
Nice.
And it was last month. So yeah. It's a really good article, and it's deeply underrated. So
yeah, I'll make sure to include a link in the item description. Fuck, item description. God, I gotta get off. So I can
what happens
go
when
back
we talk for 3 hours.
I need to go back and keep playing Elden Ring. Okay. Yeah, we have talked for far too long. Okay, so Twitters. Our Twitter for the show is SIMCREAT. My Twitter is GRIGORIKARPIN.
No complaints about how you did that. And my Twitter is at Harry Blank SCP.
My Twitter is at McDoctorate. Spelled how you might expect. McDoctarate. I can spell.
Yeah, that was vaguely... Those were most of the letters, and mostly the right order. Grigori's happy because I'm not making fun of him now.
Yeah, but you're still bringing it up. Anyway, all right. Harry?
Any final words, placeholder?
Placeholder.
Well, it's been fun, so thank you guys, my fellow writers, brave and wise, three busy little elves who talk about ourselves. And now we fade.